General Business Notice Number 1, standing in the name of Mr Guyula, to move a motion concerning eradicating racism.
I call the member for Mulka.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the Northern Territory Legislative Assembly, one, affirms the NT's obligation to prevent racism and racial discrimination under the positive duty law and calls for system-wide actions aligned with the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. And two, urges the co-design of an anti-discrimination, anti-racism strategy, rather, grounded in the National Anti-Racism Framework in full alignment with the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. Madam Speaker, I bring this motion to the House today because I feel it is important that the Northern Territory acknowledge the fractured communities that we are living in and work towards some positive measures to make things better for everyone living here in the urban towns and in remote and regional communities. Madam Speaker, racism is something that exists throughout the world. We are not unique in the Northern Territory, but my concern is that it appears to be increasing. At times, it may not be easy to see because it is hidden with the systems of society, and at the other times it can be easy to see because it sits on the surface. Last week, I met with some First Nations visitors from Canada, and they said coming to Darwin was like stepping back in time, because Canadian First Nations people have more rights today than the Aboriginal people have here, and that in part is due to treaty. Madam Speaker, as the Aboriginal people and I as Aboriginal person in Darwin, I don't want to say this, but I am sad to say there is a strong feeling that I am no longer welcome here. This is the feeling in many towns on the Stewart Highway, and I have had encounters where I am being treated without respect because I am an Aboriginal person. And if I can have these experiences when I visit Darwin, when I am wearing a shirt and jeans and driving a hire car, what is happening for everyone else here, or who are struggling with day-to-day living. And I And I've heard many other Aboriginal people telling me their experiences of racism as well. And I've heard stories of the security guards moving people on, people who are not a public nuisance, but people, because of the color of their skin, and because they are Aboriginal, seen to be public nuisance just because of who they are, just for being homeless in Darwin and without a house to stay in. Madam Speaker, when I was in Adelaide for a surgery, I felt welcome there. And we walked in the city, people would be welcoming with a smile and open body languages in the shops. This is how Darwin used to feel like too. I've been coming to Darwin ever since I was 11 years old. The first time I was here was at Stedford to sing with the choir, and there was dancing and sports, and we arrived in Darwin to the news that people had landed on the moon during that time. It was a happy day and happy times, and Darwin has been a friendly place for people for many, many years. But I am sad to say that it feels more unwelcome now than ever. And this coincides with decades of neglect of bush communities, increased poverty, and increased social nuisance. Madam Speaker, if we look at the history of budgets in the NT, we can see that bush communities have often missed out. We know that the funding distribution means that things are built in Darwin, such as museums and Caramilla Boulevard, or the Tiger Brendan overpass, or police stations. While in remote communities, we continue to live with poor roads that become impassable in the wet season, with debilitated buildings and overcrowded housing, with barge landings that need repair and airports that become difficult to land on when there is lots of rain. We have less services to support our people. I spoke last week about the findings of Barry Hansen and a report done through the NT costs, that funding that became the funding that comes to the NT for Aboriginal disadvantage often does not make it to Aboriginal communities or Aboriginal people. This is contributed to an inadequate across our communities. In our remote communities, we look around to see that Most of the jobs are held by Balanda, and most of these people are great and work hard to help our communities. They are teachers, tradespeople, health workers, pilots, council workers, police, and more. And they are jobs that we do: ranger groups, assistant teachers, health workers. But for the most part of these jobs, the jobs in our communities are done by the outside the community, and a lack of effective education, training, or for our people has led to this. And it was always like this. Many people in Arnhem Land like to think about the mission days, and when there were fisheries businesses, the bakery, mud brick, factory logging, timber milling. The cypress pine was used to build houses in communities by people, our Yolngu people as well, and sent to Darwin as well. There were a variety of jobs that people were doing. My father traded crocodile skins and rations, 4 rations rather, and continued to live on and care for country. He was a strong man, a mediator, a leader, a high capable man. When I first finished school, many people got trades, plumbing, electricians, mechanics. Myself, as an aircraft maintenance engineer, and in the 80s, that there were many high literate bilingual school teachers. Over time, national accreditation came in, and as I said previously, when the intervention came through, many people who had skills and expertise were told their training didn't mean anything anymore, and they were put on work for the dole schemes, including myself, like painting rocks with to make a border of car park and picking up rubbish around the communities. From this point, we see and we saw a great increase in Balanda workers who came into our communities and lived in new houses and earned good money while not having to pay any rent. Any of these people had new work cars, or brought their own four-wheel drives. The difference compared to with the local community in overcrowded houses with very little money became stalked. Right now, we are living with the consequences of children who have grown up seeing these stalk differences, seeing FIFO workers come in for work while community members do not, seeing houses where the power doesn't run out, and fridges are always stocked with food. I've been told that often the kids are breaking into houses in communities. It is the food cupboard and the fridges that is always raided. The lack of employment in the bush for locals, the lack of training for people, but especially in industries industries that we want to see, has led to widespread disengagement rather, and despair. Not all people, but some people have turned to gambling, kava, alcohol, and ganja. Others have turned to the church and support the community in this way. Some, like myself, come to the Balanda institutions to try and educate Balanda about the ceremony, law, language, and culture that we still have. We try to show people that we live by life according to Yolngo Rome, but that the clash of the two cultures is risking the end of our people and culture. And we appeal for partnerships and genuine local decision-making to try and fix the problems that have occurred with constant failed interventions from government. We also stand strong to try and teach our young people about Yolngorom, rapidity, respect, and strength of our culture and ancestors, so that our young people can be proud, self-disciplined Yolngo people. And this is still happening, but it is becoming harder to do in the face of Balanda assimilation. Northeast Arnhem Land and many communities in the NT where there is a strong cultural knowledge still maintained and taught one of the last frontiers, and we must stand strong to maintain our culture and our kinship systems, our language, and our law. Governments must support us to do this through genuine acknowledgement of our authority and acceptance of two ways, not this constant one way of assimilation approach that is killing our people. Madam Speaker, it is very sad to say, but today it's possible to grow numbers of people in jail may become a leading occupation for Aboriginal people in the NT. This is why the Aboriginal Justice Agreement and the National Framework and anti-racism have come so incredibly important. Madam Speaker, I seek to leave. I seek leave to table the National Anti-Racism Framework.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted. Did you want something, Member
All.
for Mulka? You're okay?
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Then, Madam Speaker, it is very sad to say, but today is it's possible to grow numbers of people in jail from may become a leading occupation for Aboriginal people in the NT. This is why the Aboriginal Justice Agreement and the national framework of anti-racism and have become so incredibly important. Madam Speaker, sorry, I probably read this at the same time, sorry. Madam Speaker, there is increasing systemic racism within the NT that must be addressed. Both of these documents create both strong pathways to address systemic racism with a view of creating a fairer community where Aboriginal people are not disadvantaged just because we are Aboriginal, and a community where we can live according to culture. There is a space here in the NT to create an anti-racism framework of our own that works together with the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. Madam Speaker, when 5 police officers said there were no racism in the TRG and that the Nuguda awards were not racist, the �𝙈𝙈𝙋𝙎 Commissioner failed to properly investigate the many years where police officers have awarded each other for having bad hygiene or not doing a very good job. It was something they thought was funny, but it is highly offensive to Aboriginal people and people who they would work with every day. The people they were supposed to treat fairly and equally, but thought so little of. The 𝙈𝙈𝙎 Commissioner stated that the awards were clearly racist and that it is difficult to conclude how any person of reasonable intelligence could conclude otherwise. These awards were presented as evidence during the Kumanjay Walker inquiry, which was uncovered many problems that have need to be addressed. Commissioner Murphy understood. What understood was that that there was entrenched systemic and personal opinions of racism in the police force, and this is why he came forward with an apology. This apology conveyed a promise of working to make things better, and this is included working towards a police review and changes to address issue of racism. The Aboriginal Justice Agency, the AJA, was also provides a mechanism to audit government departments for systemic racism. This started with DIPL, and then nothing went any further, and no public report was provided. But these are the things we must move forward and do, and we must look at everyone as people, not problems. We must look at and find how we work together to bring systemic change. Madam Speaker, sometimes it feels as though the government decision is all about trying to make the government feel comfortable and homely visits from outside. But there is a little discussion rather about how to look after the people who are already here, the First Nations people who have always been here. How do we look after them? How do we make them comfortable and safe, and not just looking for the horizon, not just looking towards the horizon to who else is coming along? The government talk a lot about territory lifestyle. We also want to live on our country and our ideal lifestyle. This would be living according to �𝙈𝙈𝙆𝙆, but this government is not talking about our lifestyle. It is not reflecting the diversity of lifestyle that exists here in the Northern Territory. When the government talk about a territory lifestyle, it needs to include those of us who have lived on homeland country, learning from our elders and about the land of our kin, our responsibility values, our law and our way of living. I want to walk on my country each day, hunt and make a business that would become a family business. This is what my father did, and this is the territory lifestyle that I long for. But policies over decades have neglected homeland and towns, and meant that people meant that many people have been forced into bigger towns where there are increasing problems. Madam Speaker, and I...
Take your seat, Member for Mulka. What's your point of order?
It's a time extension for the member for Mulka.
Is an extension of time granted? Those in opinion say aye. Yes, it's granted. Please continue, Member for Mulka.
Thank you. Thank you. But this government is not talking about our lifestyle. It is not reflecting the diversity of lifestyle that exists here in the NT. When the government talk about a territory lifestyle, it needs to include those of us who have lived on homeland countries, learning from our elders and from the land or our kin, our responsibility values, our law, and our way of living. I want to walk on the country each day, hunt and make businesses becoming for the family issues. This is what my dad and his the territory lifestyle that I long for. The policies, Madam Speaker, the point I am making is that the Northern Territory government has neglected the bush, both homelands and communities. An unspoken policy of putting money into towns has meant the problems in the bush have included. But it is not just about the money. The decision-making power has also been maintained in urban towns with bureaucrats and ministers making decisions for Aboriginal people, ignoring our rights of self-determination. We have consistently felt that we are manipulated and oppressed by decisions made elsewhere. Like the disempowerment from the intervention and through the closure of the community councils, the problems that are developed in the bush through disempowerment are now spilling over into urban centres. But this has not resulted in increased funding and services in the bush so that we can solve these problems. Instead, we see a growing response is to throw more people in jail. The bills that have passed through this House under this CLP government will mostly impact Aboriginal people, and yet we have not been consulted on any of the bills. Madam Speaker, the number one priority of closing the gap is shared decision making. This is how we close the gap, and this will be also helpful to eradicate racism through a flow-in effect where everyone is more equal, standing together on the same playing ground. it is not good enough for this CLP to say everything is bad because Labor did a bad job. The CLP government is the decision making now, and it's time for them to own their decisions and account for their actions. To the report of the eliminating racism in the government that was provided and produced in 2023 rather, by David Hollingsworth, advised that not only the racism morally and legally wrong and physically or mentally damaging to its victims to lead to a society with higher levels of violence, conflict and anxiety, while simultaneously failing to benefit from different perspectives and practices that include social cohesiveness and collaboration with which also leads to reduced economic costs. For these reasons, it is so important that we address racism in the Northern Territory. We create a pathway for a safe, better, something better. And this is a motion that today is about creating the pathway to develop the anti-racism framework. This is incredibly important in our heal and communities, because we are all hurting, and it is only by working together that we can bring genuine change for the people. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Just before you start, I'd like to acknowledge on behalf of honourable members, the member for Nightcliffe's biggest fans, or some of them. Johnston. I was looking at you, member for Johnston, and I said something else. Her mother and her mother's partner, Dina and Kit. Welcome to Parliament House. Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a matter of deep meaning, not just as the Attorney General, but as someone who cares deeply about our community and the future of the Northern Territory. I want to thank the member for Mulka for his courage in calling out racism. I want him to know he doesn't stand alone. And Madam, I move an amendment to this motion that this Assembly, 1, acknowledges the harm caused by all forms of racism, whether based on race, ethnicity, culture or religion across the Northern Territory. 2, recognises the government's role in preventing discrimination and supporting the Territory's harmonious multicultural community. And 3, calls on all Territorians to stand up and call out racism when it occurs. Madam Speaker, here in the Northern Territory, we are different. We are multicultural, we're young at heart, adventurous and transient. And it's transient because of our location on the map. We are the gateway to Asia. We have people coming from all over the world, enjoying our fantastic tropical environment and welcoming nature. We are proudly home to the world's oldest living culture, and we uniquely celebrate cultures from every corner of the globe. Whether it's through events like the Harmony Soiree at the waterfront next weekend, like the fantastic Barunga Festival, like Holi, Greek, Italian, or the Bangladeshi festivals. Our markets are a melting pot of food, languages, music, and identity. That's our lifestyle. That's our territory. It's what makes us unique, and you simply can't compare it to anywhere else. Madam Speaker, I do not believe that racism is eradicated with more laws or more red tape or more boxes to tick. It's important to have policies in place, but racism won't be solved by banning words or throwing money at this problem aimlessly. Approaching this problem with an ideological focus with no accountability is what Labor's approach was. And our government was elected to do things differently, to reduce crime, rebuild our economy, and restore our territory lifestyle. And that is exactly how we will fight racism, by building a fair, safe, and prosperous territory where everyone feels they belong. Because when people feel safe, when they can work, invest, raise families, and celebrate who they are, racism fades. Madam Speaker, we will continue to support frameworks like the Aboriginal Justice Agreement and the National Anti-Racism Framework, and yes, we support practical action. But let's be honest, we inherited a budget mess. Net debt forecast to hit $13.96 billion. We can't fix racism overnight with policies or paperwork. What we can do is empower people through education, community partnerships, cultural events, and celebrations, and by enforcing the protections we already have. And that includes the positive duty laws under the Anti-Discrimination Act. These laws ensure all businesses and organisations take active steps to prevent discrimination, harassment and victimisation. Not just react to complaints, but stop it before it starts. These are laws we have in place, and they apply broadly across race, gender, disability, religion, and more. It also means continuing to work with national partners, including through the Standing Council of Attorneys General and the National Anti-Racism Framework. Madam Speaker, racism thrives where there is division, where people don't feel safe and secure. But when there is a shared purpose, shared lifestyle, there is a thriving community. Differences become strengths, not threats. That's the territory I believe in, a place where it doesn't matter what your background is or where you're from. You can build a life, feel welcome, feel safe, and have a fair go. We are not generally racist people, Madam Speaker. We are welcoming, we are proud, we are Territorians, and we come in all colours and backgrounds. And like with everything else that we're tackling, like reducing crime, rebuilding the economy, and restoring our lifestyle, it's about action, certainty, and security. Madam Speaker, we won't be able to fix racism with more paperwork or politics. We fix it by working together and backing the values that make the territory great.
Minister, you need to sign that amendment and have it circulated before it can be debated. Did you want to wait till the amendment's circulated before you speak, Member for Johnston? We might just have to... Beg your pardon? We will vote on the amendment and the motion, yeah. No, separately. So we vote on the amendment. If the amendment's passed, then we then vote on the amended motion. Is that correct? So we can't vote on anything until the amendment's been circulated. Yeah.
Sorry, they'll be at the same time.
No. Yes, in succession.
So I'm happy
Yeah.
to make my speech now.
Okay.
Then. Yeah.
All right. Continue.
Sorry, can I just clarify? Point of order.
For Fong Lim.
Well, I'm just trying to establish what's going on here as well. So if there's an amendment to that motion and that's being circulated now, presumably the debate that's ensuing now is about the amended motion.
Yes, correct.
And then whatever vote transpires at the end, I'm just seeking clarity if
Yes.
nothing else. At the end of this debate then, there will be a vote on the amended motion.
Amendment.
And if the amended motion vote is hypothetically passed, then we will vote. Sorry, if the amendment is passed, then we will vote on the amended motion, not the original motion. It supplants that, does it not? Is that correct? Yeah,
That's
thank you.
correct.
That's the indication I'm getting. So I just don't want anybody to be confused about what it is we're actually talking about now. Then.
That's correct.
So I'm not in a position to speak, so I'm speaking through the chair. So I will reiterate that an amendment's being circulated. That is what we are debating now. At the conclusion of that debate, we'll vote on that amendment before anything further happens. If the vote was lost, then we would be considering the original motion. But if the vote is approved, we will only be considering the amended motion. Correct?
Correct.
Madam Speaker?
I said correct.
Thank you for clarifying that for me.
You need to continue to speak to move your amended motion.
So I moved at the beginning of my speech and then I spoke and then
And now you're circulating your
it's circulated.
amended motion, and
that's
you
right.
need to continue to speak and move that motion.
Okay, so...
But if you have finished your speech,
Oh, I have, yes.
you can sit
Yeah,
down.
so I've moved the motion.
And the amendment has been circulated. The member for Johnston is happy to speak to the amendment, which may just mean speaking as you would have normally anyway, if you choose. I'm not going to lead you in any way, but...
Can I just clarify, this adds to the motion or replaces the motion? Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Chamber. Madam Speaker, I want to thank the member for Mulka, not just for bringing forward his important motion, but for the example that he sets in this chamber and beyond. He speaks with courage about fairness, calls out injustice and continues to show grace in the face of the mistreatment he has experienced. And I also want to acknowledge all the First Nations people and others with lived experience of racism who do the emotional and intellectual labour of naming what many refuse to see, who speak the truth about racism even when it's uncomfortable or costly. There are people inside and outside this chamber who reject the idea that racism is a problem in the Northern Territory. Some say we're all equal now. Some say we treat everyone the same. Some say talking about racism just divides people. To those people, I want to say as plainly and respectfully as I can, just because you don't see racism, it doesn't mean it isn't there. Just because it hasn't happened to you doesn't mean it doesn't happen every single day to someone else. In fact, that's how racism works best, in silence, in disbelief, in the assumption that the system is fair, that the outcomes must be deserved, that the problem is with the people, not the policies. Racism isn't always loud. It isn't always slurs or violence. It's being followed in a shop because of your skin colour. It's being refused a hotel room, being stopped by police again and again for no reason, being overlooked for jobs, being asked for ID at a petrol station. And racism isn't just personal, it's systemic. It's what happens when our institutions consistently produce unequal outcomes and we fail to question why. And here in the Northern Territory, the data tells a clear and undeniable story of systemic racial inequality. We know that Aboriginal people make up less than a third of the Northern Territory's population, but over 90% of its prison population. Aboriginal children are placed in out-of-home care at a rate 12 times higher than non-Aboriginal children, a stark reflection of ongoing structural inequities. Aboriginal people are still dying in custody, in remand, in mental health facilities, often without answers or justice, and Aboriginal people are still being overpoliced, underprotected and made to feel unsafe in the very systems that are meant to serve them. Can we really call that coincidence? Madam Speaker, naming racism doesn't divide... Mr Deputy Speaker, naming racism doesn't divide us. Ignoring it does. We in this chamber don't get to pick and choose who deserves safety, dignity and justice. Either we represent everyone or we represent no one. The member for Mulka's motion is a call to responsibility. It asks us to do what we are already obligated to do under law, prevent racism and racial discrimination under the positive duty provisions in our federal anti-discrimination legislation. Reporting racism is not optional, it's required of us. It also asks us to honour our commitments under the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, a plan we co-created with Aboriginal Territorians, which clearly identifies racism as one of the drivers of overrepresentation in the justice system. We can't fix a justice system if we refuse to talk about racism. The motion also calls for the co-design of a territory-wide anti-racism strategy developed with Aboriginal people, multicultural communities, legal experts and human rights advocates, and grounded in the national anti-racism framework which the member tabled today. We can't change the past, but we can choose what kind of territory we want to build together next. Other jurisdictions are already moving here. Victoria has a strategy, New South Wales has a strategy, Queensland is developing one. And the Northern Territory, the home to the highest proportion of Aboriginal people in the country, has no coordinated anti-racism plan. This is a serious gap and we can fix it. A territory-wide anti-racism strategy wouldn't be symbolic, it would include real, practical steps, like anti-racism training for all public sector agencies, accountability measures to ensure fair service delivery, education campaigns to tackle bias and misinformation, proper funding for Aboriginal-led and multicultural organisations, and system audits and equity standards to make sure that we actually are doing better. As I said, this is about system-wide change, not just individual attitudes. It's about supporting the many people, teachers, nurses, police officers, public servants who are asking for guidance, who want to do better, who are tired of working in systems that keep producing injustice. And it's also about honouring the courage of those who continue to speak up, often at great personal cost, to make sure we hear what many would rather ignore. Mr Deputy Speaker, we often say that the Territory is unique. We've heard it here in this chamber just now, that we do things differently. Well, here is our chance to prove that. This motion doesn't demand perfection, but it does demand honesty, leadership and a commitment to building systems that treat no one as less because of their culture, their background or the colour of their skin. And if we reject it, what message do we send? That racism is acceptable, that it isn't worth talking about, that we're not invested in addressing it, that the people who are affected by racism are exaggerating or they don't matter, that our parliament is more committed to comfort than to justice. I don't believe that that's who we are. My own Jewish family knows the pain and fear that racism can bring. That history has taught me one thing: we cannot stand by. We must not be silent when others are being treated unfairly, no matter who they are. The people of Johnston, who I represent, come from all walks of life. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, migrants, families of many faiths and cultures, all living side by side. They want a territory where everyone is seen, heard, safe and treated as equal. They want a system that works for all of us, not only some. Let's not be the jurisdiction that looks away. Let's be the one that looks hard at the truth and then does something about it. I commend the member for Mulka's motion to the House. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Johnson. Any further speakers? Member for Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak to this motion. I appreciate the words from the member for Mulka. He's a man I have enormous respect for. And even though I will be touching on similar themes in my speech, I'll be supporting the government's amendment. The Australian Human Rights Commission released the National Anti-Racism Framework, a document shaped by national consultations and presented as a roadmap for reducing racism across key sectors like health, education, justice, and media. This framework is sincere in intent and captures stories of pain and hope from many Australians. However, as someone who has worked across frontline services and government systems, I must be honest. The framework in its current form is not practical for government implementation. The scope is enormous. It asks government to manage not just service systems, but human perceptions, community attitudes, individual interactions, things no policy or budget can fully control. That doesn't mean the ideas should be dismissed, but it does mean that we cannot adopt this framework in full as it stands. Instead, we should continue to listen to communities, support fairness through action, and confront racism in ways that are practical, measurable, and unifying, not ideological or divisive. In that spirit, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'll speak on racism, not from a place of theory, but from lived experience and from real stories shared with me by people in my electorate and across our Northern Territory. Let me begin by making my stance absolutely clear. I do not support racism in any form, none, and am not afraid to name it, call it out, and challenge it, no matter where it hides or how it dressed up. I speak today not only from my own experience, but on behalf of people I proudly represent in Sanderson. I speak with the stories of constituents, former colleagues from the public sector, and many others from all parts of the Northern Territory. What I say today may be hard to hear, but it is the truth. There is an old saying, tell a lie often enough and it becomes the truth. It's not my line. It was the method used by Joseph Goebbels, a propaganda architect in dark days of history. Let me repeat it, tell a lie often enough and becomes the truth. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is exactly the method Labor is now using in this chamber, in public discourse, and in political strategy. Repeat things that are false, stir emotion, play identity games, repeat it often, and hope it all becomes truth with time. But the truth does not need help. It stands on its own. And here's one of those truths. Racism exists, but it exists in many forms, not just the kind like other people like to talk about. Let's talk plainly. There is no race on this earth made up only of good people, none. And no race is made up only of bad people either. There are good people and bad people in every group, every culture, every land. That's the truth. And pretending otherwise is not only false, it's dangerous. In recent months, I have had members of my community come forward quietly, respectfully, and share their stories. Some have told me they feel judged not by what they do, but how they look. Others say they feel they are being told in subtle ways that they do not belong, that they are a guest even when they are citizens, parents, or elders in their community. This is not the Australia I believe in, and this is not something I will accept. As I said in my maiden speech, we all came from somewhere else. Every person in this country, if you go back far enough, has a story of migration, be it thousands of years ago, hundreds of years, or just a decade ago like me. Let me say this clearly. My daughter was born here. Her birth certificate reads Darwin, Australia. And if I say it in another way, this is Eradicate land. That means I belong here too, because she belongs here. I am her parent. I gave her life on this land, and I live here, I work here, I fight for this place. So to anyone who thinks some of us don't belong, you are wrong. This land is my home, and I'm here to stay. Now let me share an incident from my election campaign. This happened at Waggaman, which is part of my electorate, during the roadside waving. I was there with 4 or 5 other friends from multicultural backgrounds and 2 mates who are Caucasian. We were simply waving and saying hello, being part of our democracy. A man around 75 or 80 years old, wearing a Territory Labor shirt, walked by. He looked at us and said, "You know, we brought you here." Let me repeat that. We brought you here. He meant Labor brought us, people like me, to this country. I don't intend to debate whether that statement was racist. I will leave that to those listening or reading Hansard. However, I can say one thing, it is soaked in arrogance. It reeks of ownership. It's a kind of mindset that says, you are here because of us, you owe us. And I say to that, no one owns us. We are here because of our choices, our work, our dreams, and our rights, not because of one party or one group allowed us in. This is exactly what I mean when a lie is repeated again and again and again, until people start to believe it. The campaign of misleading claims is designed to stir people up. And when that happens, when one group starts believing they are gatekeepers, the poison of racism spreads further. Let me remind all the members of this House, no one holds a special rank. The Labour or crossbench members of this House are not better than this side of the chamber. You are not above others. You are fellow Australians, equal to every one of us. Now, racism isn't always loud. It isn't always someone yelling in your face. Sometimes it's quiet in a gesture, a look, or a tone. It's in policies that divide, words that exclude, and labels that keep people boxed in. Both forms are harmful, and both must be called out. But the answer is not to fight racism with more division. When a government tells one race, you are better or you deserve more, they are not healing wounds. They are making new ones. Since the day I arrived in this great land, I have been told Australia is a land of opportunity. I believed it, and I still do. I have lived it. This country gave me a chance, but I also had to earn it. Now let me talk about something that has shaped my thinking, something from science. Charles Darwin's survival of the fittest theory, the well-known theory from long ago, still rings true in many ways. People are born with different strengths, different talents. Not all paths are equal. Not all people can do the same things. That's not wrong, that's nature. A strong education system helps people find their strength and follow it. Let me explain. If I think I can be a singer, but when I sing, people turn away, I must learn. I must read the room. If my sound does not please people, I should not say they are racist for not clapping. That's not racism, that's feedback. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I take a moment to reflect on something personal that might happen to me on any given day. If I walk into a takeaway shop in shorts, t-shirt, and a phone in hand, someone sees me and thinks I am a Uber Eats driver. Does that offend me? No. It's not hate, it's habit. It's built on what people see often. And when certain patterns happen again and again, people make links. All of us do it in many ways. You may see a person in scrubs and assume they are a nurse who works in a hospital. You may see a person in orange high-vis and assume they are a tradie or a road worker. These are not in themselves crimes. These are how people make sense of the world. No law can stop that. No government can erase thoughts. You can't police every look or every thought. And if a government tries to go too far, it becomes something else entirely. When governments go down the path of banning people's culture, people's food, people's identity, that's not fairness, that's control. That's where racism can grow again, under a new name. So I say this, government should stay out of people's lives unless something causes harm to others. We should let people live, let them eat what they want, wear what they want, worship as they choose, as long as it harms no one. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm a proud Australian of Indian origin. I'm a proud father, I'm a proud Territorian, and I'm proud of where I came from. All of these things can sit together. I do not need to choose one and throw away the rest. I will keep calling out racism, I'll keep pushing for fairness, and I will not be silent when someone says I don't belong. This country is made by many hands, many hearts, many journeys. I belong here just like you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Sanderson. Member for Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I just want to acknowledge the original motion that was put forward by the member for Mulka, and not to take away anything that the government have put forward in regards to the amended motion, which states, acknowledges the harm caused by all forms of racism, whether based on race, ethnicity, culture or religion across the Northern Territory. 2, recognises the government's role in preventing discrimination and supporting the Territory's harmonious multicultural community, and calls on all Territorians to stand up and call out racism when it occurs. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm sure us on this side of the House, bipartisan support, agree with that's been put forward. But what I am concerned about is that they've come and fluffed this up by taking away what the original motion was here for in the first place. There was actually a framework to be put in place, something practical to be put in place by the member for Mulka. We're not disagreeing what you've put here in this amended motion. That's not what we're saying. So don't come in here and try and politicise it, because that's exactly what you've done in your last speech. And I think it's absolutely disgraceful, because we've all got stories, including myself, about the treatment of people from certain political parties, all political parties, not just them. But here, we had a framework that the member for Mulka was calling, and you didn't even have the guts to talk about it and agree to it. That's what's shameful about the amended motion. Because what it's saying, the member for Fenny Bay, if you'd actually listen and understand what it means, is that the Legislative Assembly affirms the Northern Territory's obligation to prevent racism and racial discrimination under the Positive Duty Law, and calls for system-wide action aligned with the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. And I'll remind the government, when you were in opposition, the CLP government, you signed that. So we got bipartisan support on that, but yet you're taking that away. The second point, Mr Deputy Speaker, urges the co-design of an anti-racism strategy grounded in the National Anti-Racism Framework in full alignment with the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, which you have signed. And what was ironic about all this when it came to the signatures around it all, because I remember when it was happening, I was working for the minister at the time, Selena Uibo, a proud Aboriginal woman from Arnhem Land who was the Aboriginal Affairs Minister. And then you had a non-Indigenous person on that side worrying about the signature block. He wanted to take the glory away from the Aboriginal Affairs Minister, who's an Aboriginal woman. That's what's so ironic about this. Because he was more worried about himself, about a signature block for the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. And then you come in here and make an amendment to take away what the member for Mulka is trying to put a practical framework in place and get the government to agree to that. That's what you've just done. You've just fluffed it up. And that's what's disgraceful about the amended motion. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I will talk back in regards to the original motion, because I think it's important to ensure that we get this on the record. Evidence of racism's harm in the Northern Territory is clear and disturbing. Racism continues to be a blight on our country, trickling down to our community and on an interpersonal level. We witnessed it on the national stage only a couple of weeks ago on Anzac Day, where a group of neo-Nazis booed a welcome to country ceremony at Melbourne's dawn service. which was truly a disgusting act. Not only did it show the blindness of those hecklers responsible for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander service, sacrifice and legacy in our country's military service, it spurred on another disgraceful discussion which subjected First Nations people to unique experiences of racism. The last week of recent national federal election campaign descended into a culture war farce, using Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and issues as political footballs and a kicking stool for a last-ditch effort for votes. And we saw that from this government when the Chief Minister, Leah Finocchiaro, refused to acknowledge the �𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙆𝙎 people. She tried to kick Aboriginal people around and use us as a political football. That's what she was doing. That's not what she was doing. It doesn't matter. She's the Chief Minister. She's the leader of the Northern Territory. That's what leaders do, acknowledge the traditional owners. And we hear the heckling over there because they're uncomfortable by it. But do you know what I'm now hearing? Oh, all of a sudden she's brought it back. She's going to now acknowledge traditional owners. We're hearing her say it at different events, and people are a bit confused by this. So yes, she is using that as a political football, and we as Aboriginal people know that. So don't come in here and try and lecture me as an Aboriginal person. And we are First Nations people, and we are proud of that. And we are not taking away who you are.
Let the member
We are not taking away our wonderful multicultural community, because I've got many friends of different backgrounds. Don't you worry about that. And I think those opposite are actually missing the point, because I can hear their interjections. They completely miss the point. And I suggest you go and educate yourself on it. This includes the worn-out narratives of changing the date of Australia Day, not standing in front of either the Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander flag, welcome to country ceremonies, and the return of the voice. It was absolutely shameful, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It sucked any oxygen out of talking about what desperately actually needs airtime in the area of Aboriginal affairs, such as tangible and compassionate investments in closing the gap. Education, housing, healthcare, culturally appropriate disability support, and long-term employment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I know there are those today who will talk about their experiences of racism, and we've heard that already here today. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, our own leaders and communities have begun speaking out frankly about how they've seen racism occurred in the Northern Territory. We've spoken before in this chamber about the Northern Territory Aboriginal Justice Agreement, which acknowledges that improving services for Aboriginal Territorians requires identifying and eliminating systematic racism and discrimination. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we cannot ignore these warnings. This motion demands that we confront the poison of racism head-on in every area of life. As the member for �𝙎𝙎𝙎 has repeatedly said in this chamber, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And looking again at our justice system, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the disparities are horrendous, and Aboriginal Territorians make up 87% of NT prisoners, even though they make up roughly 30% of the population. Aboriginal men are jailed at 15 times and women at 14 times the rate of non-Aboriginal Territorians. Children suffer most of all. An Aboriginal child in the NT is 35 times more likely to be detained than a non-Aboriginal child. These are not just numbers, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Each one represents a young life deeply affected by a justice system that has not provided equal treatment for Aboriginal Territorians. This struggle goes beyond the confines of courts and prisons. The lingering effects of racism are present in many aspects of life. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is a heartbreaking situation that calls for compassion and a commitment to change. There are many complex reasons for this overrepresentation, including factors within the criminal justice system, generations of failed policies, and underlining factors that bring Aboriginal Territorians into contact with the justice system. This includes family and domestic violence, homelessness, substance abuse, poor mental and physical health, and unemployment. All of those factors can lead to high offending rates in society. For example, Aboriginal families are vastly overrepresented in homelessness and overcrowding, making up 20% of Australia's homeless population, despite only 4% of its people. Census data highlighted by the Homeless Australia outlines that Indigenous Australians face homelessness at almost 10 times the rate of the broader community, driven in part by racism in the housing market, poverty and disadvantage. Conditions that also undermine health, education and life chances. The Human Rights Commission notes that 40% of Aboriginal households live without the bare essentials, housing, clean water, food, compared to just 11% of other Australians. These housing, income and educational gaps are the hallmarks of systematic inequality. These numbers represent real people whose voices need to be acknowledged. Aboriginal Territorians have emphasised that racism has urgent and significant impacts. Justice advocate Leanne Little, a key figure in shaping the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, shared her powerful insights with The Guardian in 2023, recounting the painful experiences of Aboriginal people who confided in her about their treatment by the law enforcement and officials. Many describe feeling subhuman, subjected to prejudice and discrimination purely because of the colour of their skin. Little's account backs up our urgent need for change and compassion in the justice system. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Ms. Little also warned that fixing bad apples is futile unless we change the system. The Aboriginal Justice Agreement itself embraces openness and ownership of systematic shortcomings by the government. Mr. Deputy Speaker, tragically, we've also witnessed recent inquiries exposing this reality's repulsive side. In a coronial inquest, we saw the so-called 𝙏𝙆𝙈𝙆𝙀𝙎 Award, a certificate mocking Aboriginality with blackface imagery, and a 𝙏𝙬𝙀𝙎 Award depicting an Aboriginal man in a demeaning way. Mr. Deputy Speaker, these are not isolated incidents of the distant past. They are happening today and demand urgent action. And under the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, we must review every department for systematic racism. Mr. Deputy Speaker, so far, only one has been completed. But without proper resourcing and following through from those opposite, such commitments will ring hollow. Community organisations also see life differently. The Northern Land Council warns that racism is not just a relic of the past. It emphasises that our people continue to share their stories of discrimination and injustice at the hands of law enforcement. The NLC calls on this government and us as representatives to continue to take meaningful steps toward addressing systematic racism. We must heed these calls and act immediately if we care about safety, trust and reconciliation. Fortunately, for those on the other side, comprehensive plans to guide them already exist. Accumulation of years of consultation went into the Aboriginal Justice Agreement and continues to enjoy bipartisan support. It sets out dozens of targeted actions, including supporting Aboriginal leadership, building alternatives to custody, and overhauling data and complaint systems. The Alice Springs Alternative to Custody program for Aboriginal women, for example, reported that 90% of participants completed the program and did not reoffend. This is absolutely fantastic, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Under the agreement, the government committed to implementing every recommendation. Crucially, the Aboriginal Justice Agreement recognises that we must identify and eliminate systematic racism at the highest levels and improve data collection so we can measure whether services truly meet the needs of Aboriginal Territorians. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we must ensure that our courts, police and support services are culturally competent and free from systematic racism. These actions reflect exactly what community leaders and experts have demanded. At the national level, the Australian Human Rights Commission launched a landmark national anti-racism framework last November. This is the first comprehensive plan Australia has ever had to tackle entrenched racism. It contains 63 recommendations for reform across law, policy and public life. The Commissioner spoke plainly that First Nations and other multicultural groups heard consistently that systematic racism is deeply embedded throughout Australia and requires an urgent national response. The framework calls for things like a positive duty in anti-discrimination law, reforms in justice and policing, and better monitoring of racial bias everywhere. It echoes the work of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement here in the Northern Territory and pushes us to be accountable. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's an essential element of both frameworks and is community-led solutions. The Aboriginal Justice Agreement repeatedly commits to respectful place-based engagement and partnering with local Aboriginal leaders. We saw this in programs like the new Groot Island Justice Centre, a 32-bed culturally rehabilitation facility described by the Aboriginal Justice Agreement architects as an innovative community-based approach to reduce Aboriginal incarceration and reoffending. Mr. Deputy Speaker, every community in every region has its wisdom. The government should listen and learn because people in remote communities must be the most integral part of designing justice programs. The Aboriginal Justice Agreement envisages law and justice groups that will give communities that power from local court support to alcohol management strategies. We must ensure these groups have the authority and funding to implement local action plans tailored to their culture and needs. Mr. Deputy Speaker, some may argue that these problems are exaggerated or that we've tried enough. But the evidence, the lived experience of Aboriginal Territorians and multicultural communities tell another story. While the Territory boasts a fantastic and diverse migrant population, Edward Joseph, the President of Multicultural Council of the Northern Territory, has stated that the impact of racism is very real. Sorry, I'll say that again. The impact of racism is very real for migrants and Aboriginal Territorians alike. The Northern Land Council makes clear that dismissing racism is merely historic, does nothing but further undermine trust. Mr. Deputy Speaker, racism in our society is a cowardly blight. As representatives of our electorates, we must trust the testimony of our constituents, elders, families, children who experience discrimination in all forms in clinics, schools and streets. In conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have a bipartisan agreement that racism is a present danger in the Territory, harming public safety and community wellbeing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd ask for your permission to request an extension of time.
Leave granted? Aye. Leave is granted.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We have detailed blueprints from the Northern Territory's Aboriginal Justice Agreement to the new National Anti-Racism Framework that tells us exactly what needs to be done. Taking proactive steps towards reform is essential for fostering justice and aligning with our core ideals. By actually acting, we can prevent further harm and create a positive impact in our community. Today, I urge those opposite to move beyond the rhetoric and commit to substantial long-term resources for these frameworks and hold ourselves publicly accountable. We need ongoing, well-funded efforts to heal the deep-seated wounds and address the disparities in justice, health, education and housing caused by racism in our territory. For those who still may not be convinced on this issue, I want to read a social media post from a public group that popped up following the discourse on welcome to countries. Now, this is something I touched on earlier, and the importance of why the member for Mulka, his motion that's being put forward, is so important to eliminating this. And I would urge those opposite to us that they actually listen to this, because it's the type of actions that lead to this. The language that we use is so important, because if we're using the wrong language, it can lead to social posts like this. And this was directly straight after what we saw down in Melbourne with the welcome to country and those people yelling out. And this is what we, as Aboriginal people, see on a daily basis. Today, we gather to pay respects to traditional custodians of Centrelink offices, courthouses, waiting rooms, and stolen car auctions. We honour the generations who perfected the arts of welfare scamming, housebreaking, car boasting, and daylight shoplifting, ensuring these sacred customs survive in every suburb brave enough to tolerate them. We give thanks to the tireless taxpayers, the real unsung heroes, whose backs are broken so the chosen few can enjoy a life of free money, stolen goods, and minimal consequences. May the cycle of handouts, home invasions, and high-speed chases never be broken, and may the blood, sweat, and taxes of working Australians continue to fuel this glorious tradition. Welcome to the land where theft is culture, welfare is inherence, and responsibility is somebody else's problem. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I hope that those listening today heard that and understand the emotional toll this language takes on many First Nations people, including myself. I hope that those opposite, and all those listening, not just those opposite, those listening reflect on the type of language, like they were calling out earlier, actually understand where it causes, because we are leaders in our communities. We are elected to do a job, so people do listen to the language that we use. And I've seen, over time, over the last 9 months, that start to filter down to communities, and people experience that. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in closing, I hope this Assembly sends a clear message today that we will not rest while racism persists. I hope that those opposite consider the motion that the member for Mulka has put forward, because it outlines some very practical framework that can help eliminate racism and get us on the right path. Because no one's disputing the amended motion that you've put forward today. We understand the story that the member for Sanderson gave earlier. We do. It's disappointing that that happens, and we will never accept racism in any form. So we stand with the member for Sanderson about his story, because it is disappointing that there are still members in this community that behave like that. And that's really disappointing that it still goes on, because everyone is welcome in this community, including our multicultural community. But again, the member for Mulka has put forward a motion that the Assembly affirms the NT's obligation to prevent racism and racial discrimination under the Positive Duty Law and calls for system-wide action aligned with the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, urges the co-design for an anti-racism strategy grounded in the National Anti-Racism Framework in full alignment with the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, and we hope that those in the government consider the motion that has been put forward by the member for Mulka. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Daly. Member for Fong Lim.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's pretty much where we're at today on this topic. I prepared to speak on this motion, which then morphed into another motion, which is then morphed into another motion on fairly short notice. And I think there's sincerity behind all three versions of those motions, but probably what it has flushed out in the conversation we're having now is a lack of clarity on the intent behind what's going on here. Now, the member for Mulka's original motion on this topic was really divided into two parts. One, if you like, calling out racism in its totality, and two, reflecting upon what might be done to reflect on racism, particularly focused at Indigenous peoples and with regard and respect to the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. The amended motion conflated both those two so that we lost the first part of that, and now, again, I think, as I say, with the best of intentions, the government's amendment, which we are debating now, and so I'll confine my remarks to that, is a motion that acknowledges, obviously, harm caused by all forms of racism in more general form without being prescriptive as to solutions, frameworks, agreements, or anything allied to that. Now, that's not to say that we're not supportive of the underlying proposition, but the amendment that's obviously being put forward here suggests that the government's position is that it is more important for us to recognise in totality the entirety of our polity and to broaden out the debate today. Now, there is a diversity of opinion in this House on all matters, and I think it's important to remember from time to time that the opposition and the crossbenchers don't operate like one uniform being, and neither do the government. At the risk of committing political suicide, I thought the Voice was a pretty good idea. I thought the Voice was an imperfect step in the right direction. But the majority of people in the country disagreed with me and many others, and I respect that that's the direction that we have gone in now, and it would appear that the Albanese government, which championed that initiative, has now also taken heed of that sentiment and is moving forward accordingly. In a similarly pragmatic fashion, I'm not going to rage against the machine on a decent motion that has been put forward by the government, which I'd like us to all pass because it's a good and reasonable motion. By the same token, that's not to diminish the fact that the member for Mulka specifically wanted us to agree on something which the government clearly at this point would like more time to think about. Now, having said that, the positive measures that the member for Mulka were outlining, I think, are to be lauded, and it's a positive thing that we have a man of his stature bringing forward motions to consider racism, but also what can be practically done to address Indigenous inequality in this place. Rather than tiptoeing around everything, we all have to have the courage to be able to speak out about the diversity of each of our respective electorates. And there isn't any of us that have an electorate that doesn't have Indigenous people within it. There isn't any of us that doesn't have an electorate that is also filled with multicultural voices and people and faces, and that's been the case forever and a day. The member for Mulka pointed out that we are not unique in the NT in having to face racism. That's absolutely the case, and I'm really sorry to hear his feelings of feeling that he is no longer feeling like he is welcome here. That's tragic. That's a tragic thing to hear, and nobody wants to feel that, and the member for Sanderson in his own way affirmed the same sentiment. The idea that everybody is welcome is something that we should be getting behind, and a starting point is to agree as a baseline proposition before you move forward to how you actually put these things into motion. The thing is, I'm not interested in just talking about motherhood statements either, and some of you may recall on the 26th of March, I gave an adjournment speech at length about diversity, multiculturalism, and the fact that they are hard-fought gains and don't just happen by accident. Luxor festivals don't just happen by accident. Neither does social cohesion, neither does multiculturalism as a state-sponsored policy. And likewise, I don't think that racism disappears by you ignoring it and you hoping for the best. I think you have to actively work in that space to encourage people to be tolerant and work together. So I'm a little bit less libertarian than some of my colleagues in this regard. However, I'm more focused on what binds us as common than what divides us. And in that regard, what I see here in the motion distributed by the Attorney-General is a decent motion that is asking us all to acknowledge harms caused by racism, that is asking us to recognise that government plays a role in supporting a harmonious multicultural society and in calling on all of us to call out instances of racial discrimination, and I imagine discrimination more generally for that matter. The sentiment that the member for Mulka expressed, that racism appears to be increasing, on the other hand though, is hard to say. Actually, something like that needs to be tested, the proposition, empirically and not just with one-off anecdotal evidence. We all have stories and no one person's voice should be privileged over another, and that's exactly why it's actually not a bad idea for us to reflect on what we do have by way of data that is relevant in our jurisdiction. And so that's what I did, given I'm the data guy, dug up some data for us to just use as a baseline to start with in this conversation. Because it's much easier to document socioeconomic fragmentation. It's much more measurable. You can do that in empirical ways, and you can also assign causality, saying that it is the downstream consequence of economic and social policies that have been put in place by multiple governments over a period of time. You can test that. But as to whether or not racism is increasing or not, well, let's see what we've got on the paper at the moment. The first thing to remember is our demographic context, and that is that the Northern Territory is still the most ethnically, racially, religiously diverse place per capita of anywhere in the country. The mix of that is changing, of course, over time, but it is, according to the 2021 census, the case that 65% of our population at the moment is non-Indigenous. And so that's a good starting point to remember that whilst we have the largest Indigenous cohort anywhere in the country proportionately, we also have, proportionately speaking, more diversity, as it were. And so we need to accommodate that diversity. Now, the peak body to look at that and what happens in the space of discrimination is, of course, the Anti-Discrimination Commission. And in their 2023-2024 report, 73% of the complainants were actually of non-Indigenous heritage, noting that they had a total of 317 complainants in that cohort. Now, of that, only 9% of the complaints were race-based. Actually, a lot more of them are disability-based. And what does that tell us? Well, the first thing to note is it's a similar trend to past years, and in actual fact, it's trending down slightly. Now, that doesn't mean that racism is going away. That could mean that underreporting is occurring. That could mean conflation of those various metrics. But it is loosey-goosey to be saying that racism is on the up. It's not necessarily on the up, but it could be. The key thing is for us to look at, as I say, what data we actually have. So similarly then, if we look at the Australian Human Rights Commission's recent work, and I'm thinking specifically of the National Anti-Racism Framing Scoping Report from 2022, that essentially states that people from culturally diverse backgrounds in Australia, including in the NT, regularly face racism and systemic discrimination, limiting access to opportunities like housing and employment compared to Anglo-Australians. So again, minorities, ethnic minorities of different types, as well as Indigenous people here, face systemic, it would appear, disadvantage based on the assertion made in the Human Rights Commission report. What then of institutional racism within government? Well, as has been alluded to before, the 2023 report on the campaign to combat racism by adjunct Professor David Hollingsworth suggested that there was institutional racism, including unconscious bias and discriminatory practices affecting both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in multicultural communities. So we have some evidence, again, in reporting to suggest that we have problems within our civil service in that regard, so something to look at as well. Young people are also not to be forgotten in this equation. If we look at the NT Children's Commissioner's 2024 report, It's Up to You, Everyone to Call It Out, which surveyed 284 children and young people aged 8 to 19 across the territory, you'll find that 80% of them say that they have experienced racism. And 80% had reported having seen or experienced racism, and 31% stated that they had personally experienced racism. This is young people, right? So it's all the more insidious in some ways when it's young people that are experiencing this. Now, these figures indicate that racism broadly affects a broad spectrum of young people in the NT, possibly including those from multicultural backgrounds. We have a large Asian and South Asian community. And again, trying to control for the data on racism and disadvantage and discrimination in that community is very hard to do. But probably one of the better places you can get some information in that regard is the 2021 Asian Australian Alliance survey, which had a sample of 377 reports of racism, and 377 people, that was the sample group, reporting that 75% of Asian Australians, that is non-Indigenous people, experienced heightened racial hostility, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, including verbal assaults and physical attacks. Now, that's relevant to Asian communities, though be clear, I'm not suggesting that is specific to the Northern Territory situation. But, of course, it is notable that we have a large South Asian and Asian population. The Scanlon Foundation's 2021 Mapping Social Cohesion report is also worth having a little think about. The Scanlon Foundation, just to reiterate for those who may have forgotten, is an independent non-for-profit research institute that exists as a bridge between academic insights and public thought on matters relating to Australia's social cohesion. And the Scanlon Foundation reports that 27% of Australians from non-Indigenous, culturally diverse backgrounds reported racial discrimination in the past year, with 18% citing skin colour, ethnic origin or race as the reason. A final one then to probably think about is racism in the workplace, because it goes to the core of some of what was brought up by the Minister for Multicultural Affairs. And a 2023 Diversity Council Australia study finds that 43% of non-white, non-Indigenous employees experience racism at work, including exclusion and stereotyping, and only 25% felt that employers actually actively address it. And there's the rub of it, actively addressing it. I'm keen on the idea of us actively addressing things too, rather than hoping that the market will correct for all errors, particularly when it comes to making sure that we maintain a harmonious and diverse society. And that is why on the 26th of March I spoke at length about the fact that it's great that we all go to lots and lots of events and take lots and lots of photos and lots of costumes, but it's a privilege that was hard fought, and we've got to keep fighting for it together as a group and concentrating on what unites us rather than what divides us in order to move the debate forward. And that's why I think the motion that has been put forward today by the government is sincere in its intent. Now, what does all this really mean, all of this data that I'm pointing out? Because the fact is, no one, as I say, has a monopoly on the wisdom in this area. And, I'm not seeking to privilege any one voice or perspective. What it probably means that you can fairly say, without getting too carried away, is that there is significant quantitative data to suggest that discrimination on the grounds of race is a quantifiable proposition. So very, very silly to suggest that racism is gone, or racism doesn't matter, or that racism has evaporated. Likewise, to suggest that we should do nothing about it, or we can do nothing about it. All I'm confining that body of data towards evidencing is saying that there is significant quantitative data to suggest that discrimination on the grounds of race is a quantifiable proposition. But the quantifiable data, as I just pointed out to you, suggests that it may be a niche proposition, it may be an underreported proposition, it may not, in actual fact, be getting worse, although there is plenty in the zeitgeist at the moment about the fact that there is increasing social polarisation within Australia and issues with social cohesion. And I'm not going to speculate on the reasons for why that's the case. I'm not interested in that part of it, to be honest. I'm interested in how we move together as a group. And so what then of the qualitative? Because the qualitative speaks to the experience that is probably more important in that regard. Based on the original motion, which was on the notice paper, I reached out to a broad swathe of multicultural groups and communities around the territory as well. To say to them, the member for Mulka is putting up this thing which may come up sometime soon. If you have any thoughts on racism that you might like to let me know about, I'll try and feed them into thinking about how I might contribute to this debate sensibly as well. Now, I got a lot of very, very specific responses about people's specific experiences. Sometimes their specific axes to grind, if I'm honest. Sometimes pointing out that, you know, migrants punch down on other migrants. Some towns, you know, it's a complex system, right, to explain socioeconomic cohesion to explain social cohesion and why it may break down. But I picked out just one single contribution that I got. And with the permission of the person who sent it through to me, I'm going to read it out. The contribution is from Mr. Mohammed Raziuddin, who's the president of the United Muslims of the Northern Territory. And I picked him out because all of you are perking up and going, I know that fella, he's a decent guy. He's got lots of decent things to say. He doesn't seem super partisan. He's running a community services organisation. Yes, he does it under the label of a Muslim group, and as everyone freely knows around here, that is the faith to which I subscribe to as well. But I sort of reached out to him because, as I said, I thought it was a nice summary of many of the other contributions that I received. And the contribution that I got reads as follows, and I quote, "I strongly support the government's focus on looking at harm caused by racism, especially the ongoing impact on our Indigenous communities. I also commend your intention to broaden the debate to reflect on the experiences of multicultural communities in the Northern Territory. From lived experience, I can share that racism is still a reality for many people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. For instance, I've witnessed international students and new migrants subjected to racial slurs in public places, and even in professional settings, individuals have been overlooked or dismissed because of their accent or their appearance. In community work, I've supported people who have been denied housing or employment opportunities, not because of a lack of qualifications or references, but because of preconceived assumptions tied to their name, skin colour or religion. One young man confided that he removed all references to his cultural identity from his resume just to get a call back. Others feel they must suppress their identity to fit in and avoid scrutiny. Importantly, many of these individuals express admiration and solidarity with First Nations peoples, seeing parallels in their struggle. There is a strong appetite amongst multicultural communities to walk alongside Indigenous Territorians in the fight against all forms of racism, provided there is room in the conversation to share our own realities as well." Now, that's put much more eloquently than I would have tried to put the same statement across, and that's why I'm very grateful to Mr. Raziuddin for sharing that statement so that I could read it out. I can only fairly reflect on my own experience without wanting to prejudice the debate. And so all I will say is this. I grew up here as well, and like everybody, have stories of when I experienced, either directly or indirectly, sadly, discriminatory practice. Now, I don't reflect on them too hard, but what I do remember is that when I left Darwin to move down to Sydney, I really understood what discriminatory practice looked like, because it was a whole different ecosystem for me personally, than I had grown up in here. And I realised that, relatively speaking, this was something of a Shangri-La. And then, when I moved to England and spent an awfully long time there, I levelled up again on discovering what real racism looks and feels like. And I was grateful for my time in Sydney, and I was grateful evermore for my time in Darwin. Now, I'm not here to say racism's gone away. I'm not here to say that we shouldn't actively work together to try and tackle it. What I'm here to say is that we have it pretty good in the Northern Territory and in Darwin relative to lots of places in the world, and I want us to work together to keep that to be the case. I think our chances of that happening improve if we respectfully speak to one another in this place. I think they would probably also improve in the future if we spoke to each other behind the scenes about what we were going to talk about in this place and didn't change the goalposts all the time, which happens all the time in this parliament, has been happening for 20-odd years in this parliament. Doesn't always have to be that way. But we could find more common ground if we chose to, and we would probably find our social and economic prospects improve dramatically if we did, because there are a whole range of things that we are not going to be able to tackle in isolation in the Northern Territory without the help of the federal government, without the cooperation of one another, without building bridges with the wider world. And so for that reason, I will be, with gusto, voting, I hope, on the voices to support the Attorney-General's amendment to this motion, because I think it is a laudable objective to acknowledge the harm caused by racism, whether based on race, ethnicity, culture or religion, to recognise the government does have a role in preventing discrimination and supporting our harmonious multicultural communities, and in calling on everyone, which includes all of us, to also stand up for and call out racism where it occurs. I thank the member for Mulka in closing for bringing this matter to the chamber today and for compelling us all to confront it together, because it is only by moving forward together that we stand any chance of maintaining the Northern Territory that we all love and have, you know, fond memories of as children and whatnot. So that wasn't very eloquently put for a final summation, but I will say that I will support the motion, and I hope that we all can unanimously.
Thank you, Member for Fong Lim. Member for Karama.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Speaker, and good to see you up in the chair too, please, madam. Acting Deputy Speaker, I believe that everyone in this House thinks racism is wrong, full stop. And I stand with the member for Mulka for calling out racism in our community, including what he has directly encountered through his own experience. However, Madam Speaker, whether we like it or not, unfortunately racism does exist across the world, always has, and sadly will continue to do so. I can give you many examples from across Europe, the Americas and Asia over the centuries where racism has impacted negatively on many people's lives and has been a contributing factor to wars and conflicts, etc. So how can we minimise racism and its impact on people? Well, Madam Speaker, this is a complex question which I don't have any succinct answer to, and I'm not too sure anyone else in this House has either. What I would say is that I don't believe anyone is actually born a racist. I think they may become racist through their own lived experiences, upbringing and values shared with them by their families, friends and local communities. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, you can't fix racism with laws alone. In our free-thinking society, we have to accept that people will have different attitudes, including attitudes that we may personally disagree with. And their lived experience may have influenced them to hold a view contrary to what you and I consider acceptable. Now let me focus on my electorate of Karama and share some honest yet confronting lived experiences. While some elements of racism does occur across and within many of the ethnic communities in my electorate, I am particularly conscious and dismayed that there seems to be a growing divide occurring between some sections of our Indigenous community and other community members in my electorate. And that's the reality of what I see. I am very proud that approximately 15% of my electorate are Indigenous, and many of those are long-term residents that have lived in Karama and Mlack for 30-odd years. Yet they, like many other residents, are concerned how crime and antisocial behaviour escalated and destroyed their community safety in our neighbourhoods under the previous 8 years of this Labor government, or the previous Labor government. Acting Deputy Speaker, they are also concerned about the negative impacts that some, and I emphasise some, of their visiting countrymen are causing in our community, and recognise that these impacts are driving resentment through our community. I heard and felt the honesty of the member of Arafura earlier, referring to his reluctance to visit Karama Shopping Plaza, because of the increasing humbugging and safety concerns. Genuine concerns which are shared by many of our local residents, including our Indigenous residents. Acting Deputy Speaker, Madam Speaker, I mentioned previously that lived experience can influence people's attitude. I now wish to quote some confronting correspondence sent to me from a frustrated and scared local Karama resident yesterday evening, and how her lived experience is changing her attitude. I note these are her words, not mine, but she has given me permission to quote her directly, whether we like the words or not. And I quote, "Brian, I have lived in Karama for 27 years and never felt so scared. I just drove past the Karama shops on my way home from yoga. In the front car park, there was about 30 scattered countrymen, one about to belt the shit out of another. No security in sight. I'm so sick of seeing this disgusting violence. It was 7:30 p.m. at night. We should feel safe to park our cars and go in. But no, that place at night is like a war zone. I know it's not your fault, but it's just really sad to see this continuous and bad behaviour happening. Why aren't they being stopped? If it was a bunch of white people, it would be all over the news." Now, this next bit is important. "I was not racist, but am starting to be." I say again, I am not racist, but starting to be, and that's a real sad reflection. "I'm so sick of seeing this rot. I go to sleep at night scared when I'm home, alone. I'm frightened because my dogs are old and will no longer probably be fit to protect me if they ever decide to jump my fence." Finally, towards the end, she goes on, "Please help clean this up and put a stop to the violence we are witnessing every day. I really don't like it. It's traumatic to see and not good for our children. We have come to treat it as a normal. It's not, and it's very disturbing." Now, Madam Speaker, as I said at the outset, racism is wrong. I've talked about lived experiences, and the best way to stop racism is to make sure everyone has a good lived experience and the same chances in life, including a good job, a safe home and a strong community. Our government is focusing on things that actually make a difference, like safer streets, stronger schools and growing the economy. And yes, we need to continue to work to alleviate poverty, improve housing, deliver good education and health services for all Territorians, wherever they live. But this task does not rest with government alone. Our communities and individuals must also own their responsibility to help build the Territory and their future. Madam Speaker, when people feel safe, have a job and have a good future, there's less room for hate and fear. Everyone, no matter their background, should feel proud to live here and be part of the Territory. Racism is wrong, but we need to work hard to create a better future for all Territorians. Thank you very much.
Member for Port Darwin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that the amendment be amended to insert after that the following words. The motion be amended to omit all words after that and insert instead that. Get that right.
Continue.
Thank you. I have nothing further to add, Madam Speaker.
Oh.
Just that the motion be moved.
Are there any more speakers? Member for Nightcliff.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak in strong support
of the member for Mulca's original motion, affirming the Northern Territory's responsibility to prevent racism and racial discrimination and to call for the urgent development of a comprehensive, co-designed anti-racism strategy for our jurisdiction. I understand the amendment that we've got from the Attorney-General, and I'm assuming this second amendment is just to make the amendment comply. I think that's how that's working. Yep. So whilst I agree with the sentiment of this amendment, I don't think anyone could really disagree with the sentiment, I don't support the amendment version proposed by the Attorney-General, as I believe it waters down and totally dismisses the very tangible commitments put forward in the member for Mulca's original motion. The proposed amendments change the entire motion, removing both reference to the Aboriginal Justice Agreement and the National Anti-Racism Framework. So I just want to start by pointing out a few comments I heard earlier from the Attorney-General that stated, quote, "When people can celebrate their families and culture, racism fades." As nice as that would be for that to be true, it's not. People from all cultures celebrate their backgrounds and culture here, yet racism exists. As identified in the foreword of the National Anti-Racism Framework, quote, "We cannot effectively address racism and the harmful impacts it has without acknowledging its existence and then taking powerful action to confront it," end quote. Racism doesn't go away by simply ignoring it. We need to seriously invest in creating a framework to eliminate it. We must be proactive in eliminating racism, not just calling it out when we see it, per this amended motion. Point 3 on the amended motion fails to recognise that racism is structural and pervasive. It isn't just comments made by individuals. I don't believe anyone who genuinely wants to combat racism would support this watered-down, weak amendment put forward by the Attorney-General instead of the well-considered motion that the member of Mulka, which actually provides tangible, realistic actions to take to eradicate racism. Madam Speaker, we are at a crossroads. The signs of systemic failure are not subtle. They are not buried in obscure data sets or hidden behind closed doors. They are in plain sight, visible in the daily experiences of far too many Territorians and reflected in the institutions that are supposed to protect and serve all of us equally. Now, I'm going to take the time here because I do think this is actually the perfect time to address this, that there are some in this chamber who have taken umbrage when I've mentioned the word racism in here previously. I did previously describe the CLP's government's tough on crime agenda as punitive and racist. Now, this is something that hasn't been fleshed out in this chamber, and we really need to delve into this so there's better understanding. And once again, I do come here in good faith to put forward my thoughts. So I've heard the simplistic retort from members in this chamber that laws apply to everyone equally, therefore they cannot be racist, right? We've heard that before. This reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how systemic racism operates in practice. And it does concern me that elected members can hold such ill-informed understanding of social policy and history. And I really appreciate that this motion has come before the House because I know this has gone back and forth a lot. Members from this side talking about, the racism in certain policies and members on that side saying, how could you possibly say it's racist? So bear with me here because I think this is really important to put on the record. Let me explain it this way. When people say that something is racist, such as the CLP's crime approach, because many people say that, not just me, what they mean is that when you have a law or a system that disproportionately negatively impacts or harms one type of person or a particular racial or cultural group, and this happens because of a whole bunch of disparities such as discrimination, colonisation, poverty, systemic failures and historical reasons such as genocide, and you do not do anything to acknowledge or address these reasons, but then still enact the law or system, knowing full well the disproportionate impacts that it will have to that group of people, that's what makes it racist. And the racism lies not in the explicit text of the law, as the simplistic retorts would have you believe from the other side, and this is important. The racism lies not in the explicit text of the law, but in the willful disregard of its predictable consequences. So when government officials push forward policies knowing that they will deepen existing inequalities, whilst simultaneously refusing to address the underlying conditions that produce those disparities, they perpetuate structural racism. And that's what people mean by this. This isn't an abstract theory. We see the concrete results in the dramatically disproportionate incarceration rates of Indigenous Australians. True equality before the law requires acknowledging unequal starting positions and working to remedy them, not pretending they don't exist. So we have police watch houses so overcrowded that individuals are being held for extended periods in conditions that no Australian should be subjected to. Some people have waited months in watch houses that lack adequate access to healthcare, legal support and even sunlight. Not only is it disgraceful, but it's dangerous. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the NT's prison population rose from 2,236 to 2,400 in the December quarter of 2024. That is a 7.4 increase in just 3 months. It has continued to rise since then. More than 1% of the entire Northern Territory population is currently in custody. The only place in the world with a higher rate is El Salvador, a country emerging from decades of civil war and widespread violence. Is this really the company we want to keep? It should give us pause, every one of us in this House, that in a wealthy, developed country like Australia, such extraordinary levels of incarceration are seen as normal and even acceptable, when the people filling those cells are overwhelmingly Aboriginal. Over 83% of adult prisoners in the NT are Aboriginal, despite making up only this 25.9% of the NT's adult population. Aboriginal men are imprisoned at 15 times the rate of non-Aboriginal men, Aboriginal women at 14 times. These are not just statistics, they are people and family and communities, and what they show us is not an isolated problem of individuals, but it is the product of systemic failure. Even our judiciary is speaking out when Justice Blockland recently called the NT's reliance on imprisonment a wicked problem and urged more creative community-led solutions. The courts are asking for help and they're not being listened to. Madam Speaker, what this motion, the original motion from the member for Mulka, asks us to do is not only morally right, it is legally required. Through the Anti-Discrimination Amendment Act 2022, the Northern Territory Government has a positive duty to prevent racism and discrimination before it occurs. This is not a voluntary standard, it is a binding legal obligation. Under this law, which came into effect progressively across 2023 and 2024, government agencies, service providers and employers must take reasonable and proportionate measures to eliminate discrimination, harassment and victimisation. The Anti-Discrimination Commissioner is empowered to investigate compliance, issue enforceable undertakings and report to the Minister. The days of waiting for complaints to be lodged and the damage to be done are over. This is about building fair, safe systems from the outset. We already have a strong policy foundation. The Aboriginal Justice Agreement, 2021 to 27, developed through consultation with over 1,700 Aboriginal Territorians, sets out a roadmap for justice reform grounded in genuine partnership. It recognises what we already know, that racism is not just interpersonal, it's structural, that justice cannot be achieved through punishment alone, and that solutions must be led by the very communities who are most affected by the failures of our systems. This agreement outlines 3 core aims: to reduce Aboriginal incarceration, to improve justice outcomes for Aboriginal people, and to ensure Aboriginal leadership in justice responses. Central to that work is identifying and eliminating systemic racism across all government agencies and contracted service providers. And yet we have not aligned these obligations. The motion before us seeks to do just that by calling for the co-design of a whole-of-government anti-racism strategy, which we heard from the member for Johnson exists in other states, informed by both our positive duty under anti-discrimination law and the principles of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. This is not just good governance, it is smart, evidence-based policy, and it is long overdue. Madam Speaker, we have a model to guide us, the National Anti-Racism Framework, launched by the Australian Human Rights Commissioner in November 24. This landmark document was developed over 3 years of consultation with community leaders, anti-racism advocates, legal experts, educators and public servants. It offers 63 concrete recommendations across justice, health, education, media and employment. The framework calls for First Nations-led truth-telling and self-determination, anti-racism education in schools, formal partnerships with Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, anti-racism strategies in public and private workplaces, and stronger accountability mechanisms for systemic change. As Race Discrimination Commissioner Dheran Young said at the launch, "This is a historic moment in the fight against racism. For the first time, we have a comprehensive plan for eliminating racism in Australia. The NT must adapt this framework to our context, where the effects of colonisation are raw, the inequalities are vast, and the consequences of inaction are profound." A core thematic finding in the consultation for this framework was that, quote, "the refusal to name and confront racism has prevented meaningful progress on eliminating it. Too often, those that call out racism are attacked more than the racism itself. The focus on multiculturalism and social cohesion hides or erases many communities' lived experience of racism, as well as the nation's set of colonial foundations." Another key finding was that there was an overall reluctance from the government to name racism or use the term. The report found that the government preference for social cohesion initiatives has resulted in weaker approaches to anti-racism work and an overall lack of systemic, intersectional, strength-based and coordinated action addressing racism in Australia. This is directly talking to us. We've already disappointingly heard this failing in the government's response to the bill, with the emphasis of cultural events and celebrations and social cohesions. This is exactly what this is talking about. We have to name it and be honest and open about it. We in this Assembly are failing the communities we represent by failing to be honest about the racism in the Territory. So often members in this Assembly respond defensively when called out about racism rather than responding with openness and a willingness to learn and act. We cannot continue to celebrate multiculturalism without the recognition of the enduring racism that First Nations communities face. Some may ask whether a dedicated anti-racism strategy is needed. Let me be clear, yes, it is. Racism is not just a niche issue. It affects housing, healthcare, education, employment and justice. It fuels the overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in prisons, it damages mental health, it undermines trust in institutions, and it holds us back. As one participant in the Aboriginal Justice Agreement consultation said, "We don't want to go through discrimination. We all bleed the same blood." We can no longer afford piecemeal efforts. We need a coordinated, government-wide response with clear objectives and performance measures and community oversight. We need legislation, policy and funding that reflect the real needs of communities, not assumptions made from behind a desk in Darwin. Madam Speaker, we don't need a government that is tough on crime. We need a government that is smart on justice. Tough on crime policies have packed our prisons, criminalised trauma and condemned too many to cycles of harm. Being smart on justice means early intervention, culturally safe services, youth diversion, investment in housing and mental health, fully funding the domestic violence, family violence sector. It means acknowledging the deep legacy of colonisation and actively dismantling the structures that perpetuate its harms today. This is difficult work. It requires honesty. It requires courage. And it requires sustained political will. But the cost of inaction is far greater. The Aboriginal Justice Agreement reminds us of the importance of transparency and accountability. It calls on governments to own the existence of systemic racism and to stop deflecting responsibility. It insists on evidence-based action. The motion before us is aligned with that vision, the original motion by the member for Mulka. Let us not be a government that waits until another tragedy forces our hand. Let us not be remembered as a parliament that acknowledged the problem but failed to act. Let me close with the vision of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, saying Aboriginal Territorians, which is their vision, that Aboriginal Territorians live safe, fulfilling lives and are treated fairly, respectfully and without discrimination. This is not just a vision for Aboriginal people, it's a vision for a stronger, fairer, more united Northern Territory. And as the agreement also reminds us, we are in one canoe, we need to paddle together. I commend the original motion to the House. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any more speakers? Member for Casuarina.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, racism in any form has no place in Northern Territory. It wounds not just individuals, but entire communities. It doesn't just hurt one group, it hurts all of us. As someone who was born in India, lived in Europe, and traveled since 2002 in my life, I've seen what division can do to society. But here in the Northern Territory, I found something different, Madam Speaker: belonging. belonging. Yes, Madam Speaker. That's why I say with all my heart, this is the best place to live and the best place I want to die most probably. Madam Speaker, our territory is special because it's built on diversity. People from every background, Aboriginal, English, Greek, Indian, Filipino, Chinese, European, and many more, Madam Speaker, live side by side. But racism doesn't knock politely. It creeps in quietly, sometimes in public, sometimes online, sometimes in silence. And when it strikes, it's not just one community that feels it. We all feel the pinch, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, racism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's look in a shop, a whispered comment in a hallway, a joke at work followed by, "I didn't mean it like that." Sometimes it comes from ignorance, sometimes fear, and sometimes habit, Madam Speaker. But whatever it shows, its impact is real. Madam Speaker, even I, as a territory local, as an elected member of this House, have felt the sting of it, and I know many others in this chamber have too. Madam Speaker, but let me be clear, we're not here to blame. We are here to build. I want to share a story, not as just a member, but as a father. Since she was a toddler, my daughter, Anika, used to come with me in Casuarina every week. It was part of our routine, work, coffee, groceries, chats with shopkeepers, but lately she becomes scared. She's seen fights, yelling, and antisocial behavior near the shops. One day she asked me, "Dad, why are the Aboriginal people are always fighting here?" And I paused, Madam Speaker, because that question came not from hate, but from the confusion. And I told her gently and truthfully, Madam Speaker, not all Aboriginal people are like that, darling. In fact, most are good, respectful people. This is just a small group behaving badly. And every community has that, Madam Speaker. That's how we raise our children, to see people as individuals, not as categories, to connect with love, not the shame. I know many parents across the territory, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, do the same, Madam Speaker. A friend of mine shared her own story of how she teaches her kids not to judge. These are the moments where we shape the future, not through the politics, but through good parenting, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, that's why our government is acting, not punishing race, but to correct the behavior. Tougher laws are about protecting the community, no matter who you are, Madam Speaker. Because we cannot let small group drag down the reputation of the many. Madam Speaker, we must be clear that accountability is not prejudice, just as respect is not a weakness. Madam Speaker, when people, any people, commit acts of violence, vandalism, or intimidation, they should face consequences. but those consequences must be tied to the act, not the ancestry. If we ever allow anger at the person's behavior to slide into assumptions about the background, we have missed the mark, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to work with every Territorian, black, white, or brown, because we rise and fall together. If we label people instead of listening to them, if we box them in instead of bringing them in, we won't fight racism, Madam Speaker. We will feed it. We'll often talk about policies, about frameworks, about legislation, and they are important, Madam Speaker. But racism doesn't live in laws alone. It lives in attitudes, in habits, in silences, and in our willingness or our reluctance to confront it when it shows up close to home. Madam Speaker, racism will not be defeated by paperwork or policy statements alone. It will be defeated in classrooms, workplace, sports clubs, and family dinners too, Madam Speaker. It will be defeated when ordinary people choose decency over the derision, inclusion over indifferences. Madam Speaker, we need to be honest. There is still racism in our streets, in our schools, in our systems, but there is also hope. There are people who step up every day to push back against hate. Teachers, youth workers, police officers, nurses, business owners, volunteers, and parents, Madam Speaker. They don't make headlines, but they make a difference. Madam Speaker, let me give you another example. A friend of mine runs a small business. He had an employee, a recent migrant, who was being mocked by a customer for his accent. Instead of ignoring it, my friend stood beside him and he had quiet conversation with those customers and made it clear that disrespect wouldn't be tolerated. And do you know that what happened? The tone changed, Madam Speaker. Respect grew. That's the leadership, not just in the government, but in life too, Madam Speaker. We need more of that, Madam Speaker. We need workplaces where people feel safe to speak up. We need media that tells balanced stories, not just those that feed stereotypes. We need leaders from all sectors who call out hate when they see it, even when it's uncomfortable, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we also need to address the deeper roots: poverty, intergenerational trauma, lack of opportunities. Because racism often grows where people feel powerless or afraid, Madam Speaker. And some of the antisocial behavior we see in our communities is a symptom of that broader story of failure in education, in housing, in health, in job creation, Madam Speaker, too. Madam Speaker, tackling racism isn't separate from tackling crime. it's a part of the same solution. Because the more connected people feel, the less likely they are to lash out. Madam Speaker, the more respected they feel, the more likely they are to respect others. Madam Speaker, and so we must invest in our communities, not just in corrections, in support, not just in sanctions, in prevention, not just in punishment. That doesn't mean going soft. It means being smart. It means understanding that when a teenager vandalizes a shop, yes, they need to be held accountable, Madam Speaker. But we also need to ask, why was he on the street at 2 a.m.? Where is his family? What's he's running from? Those are the hard questions, Madam Speaker. But they matter. So do the answers, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I visited youth programs doing incredible work. Programs where mentors teach young people practical skills, life lessons, and pride in who they are. I've seen kids who were once on the verge of criminal records now, finishing school and getting jobs. Not because they were punished into change, Madam Speaker, but because they were supported into success. That's the territory I want to build, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, one where we are honest about problems, but never use them to smear whole communities. One where we are firm on standards, but flexible in support. One where we expect more from people because we believe in them. I don't believe in giving up on people, Madam Speaker. I don't believe in writing anyone off because of where they come from or what mistakes they have made. I believe in second chances. I believe in dignity. I believe in the power of respect, Madam Speaker. And that's what this speech is about. Not slogans, not blame, not division, but unity and honesty and action, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we must say clearly, racism exists and it's wrong. But we must also say the answer to racism is not reverse racism. The answer is not treating one group as always wrong and another as always right. The answer is balance, equality, and shared standards, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want my daughter to grow up in Northern Territory where she doesn't fear people who look different to her, where she doesn't make assumptions because of one bad moment at a shopping center that happened, where she doesn't have to unlearn prejudice, Madam Speaker, because it was never planted in the first place. Madam Speaker, and that starts with me, with us, with what we model in this House, in our parties, in our public statements, Madam Speaker, if we speak with fear, we will lead a fearful people. If we speak with hatred, we will lead a hateful people. But if we speak with the compassion, with the courage, and with conviction, we will lead a territory that is stronger, safer, and more united than ever before, Madam Speaker. That's the kind of leaderships I believe in, Madam Speaker. So today, I call on everyone in this chamber, regardless of party or background, to join me in this commitment, to call out racism where we see it, to resist the temptation to generalize, to understand before we judge, to teach our children well, to lead by example. Madam Speaker, because every time we do, we plant a seed of respect, a seed of hope, a seed of better territory. Madam Speaker, let's make sure those seeds grow strong. And all I know, Madam Speaker, in this galaxy we have only one planet. We know where we can breathe, live, enjoy, survive, feel, which is called Earth. There is no other place. So let's respect each other and enjoy our lifestyle. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any more speakers? Member for Arafura.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise in support of the motion brought in by my friend, the member for Mulka. A motion that's calling on this Assembly to recognise the profound and lasting harm caused by all forms of racism across the Northern Territory, and to urge the government to fully adopt and resource the actions and recommendations set out in our Anti-Aboriginal Justice Agreement and the National Anti-Racism Framework. Friends, racism is not an abstract concept or a relic of the past in the Territory. It is a daily reality for far too many Territorians in our communities. From Darwin to the most remote corners of the Territory, it is experienced in classrooms, in workplaces, in encounters with police, in the justice system, and yes, even with the very institutions that are supposed to protect us. It is lived reality for Aboriginal Territorians, and it affects our multicultural and multi-faith communities as well. Across Australia, we know racism is on the rise, and our job as leaders is to help stop it. For Aboriginal people in the Territory, the impact of this is particularly harmful. Of racism is particularly harmful. The Anti-Aboriginal Justice Agreement spells this out plainly. It details the systemic barriers that Aboriginal people face today when we seek justice, accessing health, finding housing, and getting a job. It shows how structural racism continues to thrive in the Territory. And it also sets out practical pathways for meaningful change. It should be mandatory for everybody in this chamber to read that document. I remind those opposite too, you've signed up to that agreement. You've committed to those principles. Similarly, the National Anti-Racism Framework, launched last year by the Australian Human Rights Commission, provides a roadmap for governments, institutions and communities to work together to eradicate racism. It is comprehensive, evidence-based, and clear that combating racism requires coordinated, sustained, and well-resourced actions. It highlights the need for community leadership, cultural competence, and real accountability to drive change. But, Madam Speaker, frameworks and agreements mean nothing without action. This is why the member for Mulka's motion is so important. It's not enough to endorse those documents in principle. We must back them with real resources, ongoing commitment, and robust accountability to see genuine results. That is the job we are sent here to do. At the very time we should be strengthening protections, the government is pursuing changes to the Anti-Discrimination Act that water protections down. The plan to repeal vital protections against hate speech will only make racism worse. Rolling back the rights of Territorians undoes years of hard-won progress. It leaves the most vulnerable exposed to discrimination and vilification. These concerns aren't just coming from us. Peak bodies like the Anti-Jewish Community Association have sounded the alarm. In a climate where neo-Nazi propaganda has appeared in Darwin, how can the government justify scrapping protection against vilifications? The experts, including the Discrimination Commissioner, are warning it will open the door to dangerous hate speech. Let me quote Commissioner Justine Davis. It's opening the doors for a dangerous stream of hate speech. In this time where we are dealing with a lot of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, there is a need to have provisions like this to protect our community. I think you open the doors for a very dangerous stream of hate speech here in the Northern Territory, Mr. Commissioner. While every other jurisdiction and the Commonwealth are strengthening their laws, and with racial and cultural vilification nationwide, the move to scrap this protection sends a terrible message to Territorians. Madam Speaker, racism is not just a social or cultural issue, it is a public health issue, an economic issue, and a justice issue. It leads to poorer health, higher rates in incarceration, greater unemployment, fewer opportunities for those who are affected. It is a cost the Territory cannot afford. So today, I call on the government to endorse and fully implement and resource the recommendations recommendation of the Anti-Justice Agreement, a national anti-racism framework. We need a whole-of-government response driven by various voices, informed by lived experience, and accountable to the communities we serve. I'm just going to read the member for Mulka's post from the 1st of November, 2024. Just give me a second. Just a couple of paragraphs. And I thank him for his strength. 1st of November, 2024. Darwin, a servo in Darwin refused to serve me last week unless I provided ID. I was driving my hire car to the airport to fly out to Milingimbi after Parliament sittings after the pump wasn't working. The attendant waved me inside and asked how much I wanted to pay. I said I didn't know because I needed the tank to be full. He said he wanted me to pay first. Again, I said I didn't know how much because the tank needed to be filled. He asked me to provide ID before pumping, so I said no. I'll go somewhere else and walked away. Another car in front of me arrived and filled up with no problems, and another car after me filled up with no problems. Another paragraph. This is the culture that is coming through for Aboriginal people. That we are not equal, that we are all criminals. It's about colour, not about who we are, where we're from. And it rings loud because he's a fellow parliamentarian this is happening to. They've singled him out because of who he is. We need to call this out. We shouldn't be experiencing racism in our country. As I said in Parliament last week, I'm sorry for the crime that is happening in our communities. But this has come from decades of bad government policies, like the intervention, where our people have been disempowered and dehumanized. Eradicating, so that was the member for Mulka's post from the 1st of November 2024. Eradicating racism is not just about changing attitude, it's about transforming our systems and institutions. It's about breaking down barriers and building a territory where everyone, no matter background, can live free from discrimination and tribe. So, to the government, get on board with real action. Be better, do better. No Territorian should have to live with racism. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Member for Wanguri.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today in full support of the motion before this Assembly, that this Assembly, 1, acknowledges the harm caused by all forms of racism, whether based on race, ethnicity, culture or religion across the Northern Territory. 2, recognises the government's role in preventing discrimination and supporting the Territory's harmonious multicultural community, and calls on all Territorians to stand up and call out racism when it occurs. This is not just a policy statement for me, it is deeply personal. Madam Speaker, as we all know in this House, I'm born here in Darwin of Indonesian parents, but also have Torres Strait ties. I actually have 11 half brothers and sisters that are actually Aboriginal. I grew up in Acacia Hills, a quiet rural community, in the member for Goyder's electorate, which I know he loves. In Acacia Hills, at a time where everyone gathered together and worked as a community, no matter what descent you were. I have to admit, I've had a very wonderful childhood. I grew up, obviously, in Rabbit Creek, where we had all races there, because it was probably the beginning of multiculturalism that came to the Territory, and we had many Aboriginal and Torres Strait students there as well. So I've got very many long-term family friends with all ethnic backgrounds. Madam Speaker, racism is not always loud. It doesn't always come with fists or slurs. Often it's quiet, persistent, and socially acceptable. It's in the lowered expectations, the suspicious glances, the awkward silences when someone says something inappropriate or no one corrects them. It's in the way some people assume you're here to take something rather than contribute. Racism is not just cruel, it's corrosive. It eats away at the fabric of our community. It stops people from reaching their full potential. It stifles opportunity, productivity, and trust. It pushes people to the margins. It fuels division, fuels resentment, and ultimately fuels crime. Madam Speaker, we need to say this clearly. Racism is bad for everybody. When any group is excluded or stereotyped, we all lose. When someone is denied a job because of their name or their skin colour, we lose their talent. When kids feel alienated in school because they speak another language at home, we lose future leaders. When someone feels unsafe walking down the street in their own neighbourhood, we lose the very notion of our community. But, Madam Speaker, I do not stand here in despair. I stand here with hope, because I know we can do better. I've seen the power of Territorians coming together. During my time as a child at Acacia Hills, I share a story from when our house actually burnt down and our community came together. They rallied, everybody, all colours. In Yingiya, I live in a neighbourhood, and in particular my street, I have a Greek family, 2 Asian families, an Irishman, some Aussies. So I live in a very multicultural street. But Yingiya is also, the Wangari electorate is also one of the most multicultural electorates in the Territory, with Greeks, Italians, Filipinos, Chinese, of all backgrounds. I've seen people from all walks of life stand shoulder to shoulder, and that's the Territory I believe in. But belief is not enough. We need action, as this motion rightly points out. It's not just about acknowledging the harm, it's about recognising our responsibility. We must do more than just call out racism when it happens. We must dismantle the structures that allow it to thrive. That means addressing inequalities in housing, education, health, and justice. It means confronting stereotypes, not just with slogans, but with real stories, data, and investment. Let me say this clearly. When people say racism is about bad apples, they miss the point. It's about bad systems. Systems that fail to see people equally. Systems that assume Aboriginal youth are more likely to offend rather than more likely to be let down by their school or excluded from meaningful employment. Systems that treat someone with an ethnic name as a risk rather than an asset. If we want to reduce racism, we need to reduce the root causes of exclusion and inequality. And yes, that includes reducing crime, because we cannot deny that fear and ignorance feed off one another. When there are high rates of crime in a particular group, people wrongly assume that race is the cause. But let me be very clear, race does not cause crime. Lack of opportunity, trauma, exclusion, and poverty do. I commend the Northern Territory Government for its ongoing support for multiculturalism and anti-discrimination, but we need all Territorians to step up to the plate. Madam Speaker, I also want to make one thing clear. Calling out racism does not mean hating those who say the wrong thing. It's about helping people understand the impact of their words and actions. It's about building bridges and not burning them. I've had moments in my life where someone was once racist and later became an ally. Why? Because we had a conversation. Because they were willing to listen. Because someone challenged them with kindness, not anger. So let's not be divided into good people and bad people. Let us recognise that we're all here learning, and let us all call each other forward, not just out. Madam Speaker, I stand here today not just as someone who's experienced racism, but as someone who's also witnessed incredible solidarity and change. I've seen kids from all backgrounds come together to fight bullying. I've seen workplaces embrace cultural diversity and thrive. I've seen elders lead reconciliation efforts that bring healing to entire communities. But this motion reminds us that none of this that is guaranteed. Racism doesn't disappear on its own. It takes all of us, politicians, parents, teachers, leaders, neighbours to make a choice. Every day, in every interaction, in every policy, to stand for dignity, fairness and respect. Let us make sure every Territorian, no matter their skin, surname, accent or background, feels like they belong. Madam Speaker, I began this speech sharing a story from my childhood. I want to end with a story from just last week. I was at a community barbecue in Yingiya. There were kids running around, people from all backgrounds, Greek, Yolngu, Sudanese, Filipino, Tiwi, Indian and Chinese, all sharing food, laughs and stories. A little boy came up to me, maybe 6 or 7. He looked up and said, "You look like my auntie. He makes the best satay chicken." We laughed. It was innocent, joyful, and full of connection. That's the territory I love. That's the territory I want to build. A place where our diversity is not just tolerated, but celebrated. A place where racism has no corner to hide in. A place where our children don't just feel safe, they feel proud. Let's make that vision a reality. Let's pass this motion. Let's walk the talk. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Blaine, are you racing to speak?
Madam Speaker, I originally wasn't intending to speak on this important motion brought by the member for Mulka, and I thank the member for Mulka for bringing it. He's a powerful man from his community who walks in two worlds, and I give respect to him for coming here and representing his people. And anyone who would treat him with anything less than the utmost of respect, that's just not Territorian. And for my behalf, I apologise to you that you had to experience that situation at the servo, and if I was there, I'd have a few words to that servo operator, because that's not right. That's not Territorian. I do rise to speak in favour of the amendment, or the amended motion. I'd like to speak, if I may, about the people of Blaine, because we are talking about racism in the motion, but I think there's a lot that the Territory has done which really the rest of the nation can look to in terms of the success of multiculturalism and the success of people living together from diverse backgrounds, diverse communities, and coming together in community and enriching all of us with their diverse backgrounds. That's something that when you grow up in Darwin, you don't really appreciate, because it's just the way that things are, and you don't notice until you go somewhere else. I did move to another city in Australia for a period in my youth, and it was very homogenous. Trying to get a good laksa in Canberra is a real struggle, right? The food there is not, you don't have the diversity, you don't have the markets that we have here. The Territory is really unique. If you want to find an Indigenous person in Canberra, you pretty much have to go to the tent embassy. And I think Canberra is much poorer for that. But in my electorate of Blaine, there's a wonderful representation of people, not just Indigenous people and Anglo-Australians, but people from all over the world. So we have large numbers of people from the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Thailand, the Philippines, Vietnam, New Zealand. We have a significant number of people who are Maori, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and they are amazing people. you know. And one thing that I think that a lot of particularly Anglo-Australians, one thing that we can definitely learn from our Indigenous brothers and sisters is how to have a good time. Because when you're hanging out with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, there's just a lot of laughing. There's a lot of good times. They know how to really, have a bit of fun and laugh and really enjoy life. And our Māori brothers and sisters do as well. So that's something that I do try to learn from them. And by and large, I find, when I'm door knocking in Blaine, in Bellamac, in Woodruff, in Maldon, I never know, when I knock on a door, who's going to answer. Whether it's a Catholic from the Philippines, whether it's a Thai family that run a stall at the markets, whether it's a Kiwi family that I see down at the rugby, you never know who's going to be there. And everyone just really gets along equally well. And as well, we have diversity of faith. I have, I think, the honour of having one of the two mosques in the NT in my electorate. I don't know if there's one in Alice Springs. One of the southern members will have to enlighten me on that one. And myself and the member for Brennan and the member for Spillett, member for Drysdale, have been there many times. And they always welcome us with open arms and give us a special place. And it's really enriching to just see that diversity of faith and the difference in their cultural background. And the commonalities between that faith and the Judeo-Christian faith, which my understanding is that they have a common root. And I feel I'm always glad when I visit the schools in my electorate. When I go to Woodruff Primary School, and we have just such a mix of young Indigenous faces, young Anglo-Australian faces, faces from Asia, and they're all sitting right next to each other. Gingers and blonde kids, and and Indigenous kids, all side by side, and colour doesn't even matter to them. And it reminds me of my childhood growing up here in the Territory, where, I've said many times in this chamber, we grew up colourblind. And I think that's one of the great things about the Territory, that because we all live together, and we have exposure to people who've grown up in a traditional way and know what it means, to really live in the bush properly, and we have a respect for the people who are still in contact with their ancient culture, their ancient traditions, with the sacred traditions of the land. When I go to Rosebery Primary School, they go out of their way to... the principal of Rosebery, Danielle Banachek, has a background in the arts, and she does an amazing job of putting on theatre presentations with the kids, celebrating our multicultural character and our Indigenous heritage. Maldon Primary School. I want to call out Maldon Primary School. I hate to raise one among the other, but when you look at my suburbs from a socio-economic background point of view, Maldon really has the most challenges to overcome. And I tell you what, the principal there, Principal Sylvia Gregory, she does an amazing job. She is so passionate about her kids, and especially the kids from an Indigenous background. She goes out of her way. She stays up late at night working. She runs around and will scavenge a bus from wherever she can find it to try to help these kids get to school. She organises breakfast club so that if for whatever reason when the kids come to school they haven't had enough to eat, that they can have full tummies and they can focus on their learning. And she cares passionately about these kids, you know, and doing everything in her power, so far as she has power, to try to keep them from falling into the at-risk category, from falling into the, you know, the pathway to prison that some might call it, that is there, unfortunately and very sadly, for so many of our Indigenous brothers. And she does an amazing job. And that's the Maldon Primary School really celebrates its Indigenous character. So I looked up some stats the other day. We have something on the order of 25% of the people in Maldon are Indigenous. And I do love Maldon. I think I've said this before in the chamber, because it's almost like a meeting place of the communities. I think, Member for Karama, you might have a similar experience in your electorate, Member for Drysdale, because of a number of factors. When people from community come into town, they often stay in Maldon, or they have family who have houses there. So when I'm door knocking, I'll run into a family from Palumpa, or a family from Ruminginning, or a family from Lajamanu, you know, family from Minjalung, a family from Croker Island. They could be from all over the territory, you know, and it's great to sit down with them and just listen to what they're... I'm working on the Barclay. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've had... Oh, Ali Karung. Yeah, yep. Not as many as I'd like. Please come. Yeah, come on in. And I want to give a shout out to Arnie's Free Feeds. So the Sal and Romaine and the team of volunteers there do an amazing work. Food security. You have to come out, Brian, one day, and I'll come and visit the Sikhs food van, and you know, they do an amazing. Food security is such an issue with a lot of the people that come to visit, and even the people that live in Maldon. And that's something that I you know, commonly hear, that there's not enough food, and that, you know, there's issues there around budgeting and income and secure work, you know, and all those kind of things. But the fact of the matter is that the food security remains an issue. And Sal and Romaine and the team of volunteers do an amazing job sourcing food every week and putting on you know, a free feed, they call it, for anyone with an empty tummy. And there's often a line of people, you know, 100, 120 long, you know, and anyone who wants to come, you know, and it's so beautiful, you know. We got people from, you know, Member for Daly, you know, Wadair, all around that area. I get to say hello to them, you know, Manangrita, Ramingining, they're all around the place, you know, and it's great. Get to say hello, you know, everyone has a feed, and then they take their food and they go home and share it with their, you know, the people back at home. And there's no, and you know what? There's you know, Anglo-Australians that come there, you know, like there's people from all kinds of backgrounds. There's no discrimination. It's open to all. The only thing you need to have is an empty tummy, which I think is just a wonderful thing. So Maldon has challenges, and Sylvia Gregory, the principal there, just really does an amazing work going above and beyond to help those kids have the best possible opportunity to start their life with their literacy, numeracy, and she has a laser focus on those basics in education, which is so important. If I may, I'd like to briefly touch on the classical liberal philosophy of this debate. So you need to, when you look at a situation, I know that Member for Nightcliff has talked about equity, and that racism is when you have inequity of outcome. But we need to understand that people start from different places, and we all acknowledge that we have disproportionately high percentage of people who engage with the justice system of an Indigenous background. And when you dig down into the stats, I mean, we all have personal experiences. I mean, the member for 𝙏𝙎𝙎𝙎 has talked this week about having to personally intervene, and call the police to try to stop scenarios happening and try to build safety with some situations that he was personally exposed to. And when you drill down into these statistics, there's a lot of complicated issues. But we start with, as Member for Wanguru said, you have poverty, you have difference in economic opportunity, you have difference in literacy, difference in numeracy, difference in expectations, in getting jobs and what you want to, your future employment status. And unfortunately, a lot of these factors, intergenerational trauma, growing up in a home where there's overcrowding. There was I won't mention that one. Growing up in homes where there's overcrowding, where children are exposed to domestic violence. We're all aware of the statistics that very sadly our Indigenous brothers and sisters are disproportionately represented in these statistics. But what can a government do? Can we legislate to change someone's mind? Can we legislate to change someone's opinion? Can we legislate to change someone's emotions? I don't think that's possible. I think the way we deal with racism is first by eradicating the tools of the state that treat one group differently to another because of their race. Martin Luther King, in that famous speech, said, "I have a dream," and I'll quickly repeat it here. "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today." I hope that in the NT we have made great progress towards that dream. I hope that in the NT that dream can be fulfilled. But we need to look at the drivers that are causing the over-representation of our Indigenous brothers and sisters in those heartbreaking statistics around domestic violence, around alcohol and substance abuse, around low literacy and numeracy, that then lead on to engagement in the criminal justice system, which then lead to all these terrible outcomes. I'd like to reference back to the member for Casuarina spoke about his daughter observing some behaviour at Casuarina and asking him questions. And that is heartbreaking. That is absolutely heartbreaking. But unfortunately, that is how things are learnt, not from the parents, but by kids observing different behaviours. And I have to confess, I was in the mall today talking to some friends and I heard shouting and yelling, and I looked over and it was a couple and the man was intoxicated and yelling at his female partner, and I became hyper vigilant because I thought, what's going to happen now? Is he going to hit her? Is he going to attack her? Do I need to respond? Is he going to become aggressive to anyone around? And and he walked past and yelled at his partner, but nothing that rose to the level of, but it was quite loud, and everyone in the mall, unfortunately heard it and noticed it. And it's not, it's not ideal. It's not what we want to have happening in the mall. And we need to look at the roots of that behaviour. Like, why is that happening? Why are people drunk in the middle of the day? Why are they yelling and angry in public at the person that they love and the person who loves them? I think the way that we overcome racism, as I said before, is by removing the tools of the state that...
Madam Speaker.
Yes, member for Drysdale.
I request an extension for the member for Blaine.
Is an extension granted for the member for Blaine? An extension is granted.
By eradicating tools of the state that treat one group differently to another because of their race. Now, I won't go into those because that's been prosecuted quite broadly in other forums. But I think what I've noticed and experienced is that when people work together, when people live together, when people behave in a way, I take that back. When people work together to a common goal, at work, in the shops. My first job, I worked at Sizzler washing dishes. And one of the guys that was there, I went to school with, an Indigenous fellow. I won't name him, but he's a very good friend of mine and has been for many, many years. When you work together, you don't have time for racism. You don't have time for any kind of discrimination or harsh attitudes. You've got a job to get done. One of the great things we can do is to increase Indigenous participation in the labour market, bringing economic opportunities to the groups of people who are unfortunately disproportionately affected by the negative statistics of engagement with the justice system, low literacy and numeracy. If we can bring economic opportunities, there's issues around education, yes, training, yes, but I think the biggest thing that we could do to move the dial would be to open up economic opportunities on country where people are most disadvantaged. Now, I don't know what that looks like. It could be increased tourism opportunities. There's some of the most amazing country in the world out on Indigenous land. Absolutely amazing. The member for Daly could, I'm sure, talk for hours about the beauty of his electorate. Exactly right. There are so many opportunities, There's sustainable opportunities, where you don't have to bring out a drill rig, you don't have to bring out a bulldozer, but, if the traditional owners want that, then maybe that's an option. But there's a lot of other options. Anything that brings economic opportunity to Indigenous lands, that gives people vision and a hope for the future to engage meaningfully in the economy. We struggle a lot. We talk a lot about getting kids to school, but if a child grows up in a place where almost no one has a private sector job, and I say that carefully, a private sector job, where most jobs are funded by the public sector, then why would they have an incentive to go to school? Why would their parents have an incentive to send them to school unless they're being made to? Whereas if a child grows up and there's economic opportunities where people can engage and earn their own money and do what they want with that money, then there's incentives for children to go to school, incentives for people to enter the labour market, incentives for people to work hard. And when we're working together, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, our Indigenous brothers and sisters with people from from other places whose ancestors weren't born here and connected to this land, that will tear down these walls. Because then our crime statistics will come down, because people will have hope and identity and belief in themselves. And that will tear down the walls in people's hearts where they see someone and judge them by the colour of their skin. Because at the end of the day, and this is something that I said many, many times on the campaign trail, it's not about race, it's not about colour, it's about behaviour. In my electorate of Blaine, poor behaviour is one of the biggest issues. No, sorry, I take that back. It's the biggest issue, far and away, bar none. The biggest issue, far and away, bar none, is antisocial behaviour in public housing, as I'm sure it is for you as well, Member for Karama. And it's behaviour. It's behaviour that is not appropriate when you live in the suburbs next to people. There's 20 metres between your bedroom and theirs, and if someone doesn't have to get up in the morning and go to work, and they've got a couple of bottles of Jim Beam, and they've got a big loudspeaker, and they're making a lot of noise all night, and the people that have to get up at 6 a.m. to go to work, can't sleep night after night after night, that is the sort of thing that hardens people's hearts. That is the sort of thing that leads to judgments based on superficial attributes. But if people are working, if people have purpose, then things will change. Behaviours will change. It's all about behaviour. So I'd like to finish on a call to arms. I'd like to call to anyone, to those here in the chamber, anyone listening, anyone reading these words, challenge yourself. If you examine your heart, if you feel when you see someone that you judge them based on a superficial attribute, examine yourself, challenge yourself. Say, why do I feel that way? Go out of your comfort zone. Help someone who's in need. Trust, believe, give people a chance. Let's all work together. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I commend this amendment.
Thank you, Member for Blaine. Any further speakers? Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak on this very important original motion that was brought forward by the member for Mulka. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do have a further amendment. I know there's been a few amendments, so I've had to get some good advice, and I really do appreciate the work of the tabling office and the clerk and his team to make sure that I've got the correct wording, because there's been, I think, 3 amendments in a row. So thank you, Tabling Office, for circulating my amendment this evening, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I move that the member for Port Darwin's amendment be amended to omit the words, omit all words, and that, and insert instead, and insert instead, insert after. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you for the technical advice to the Tabling Office, because I don't know if I would have got that correct wording if I'd been doing it on my own, and that's why we appreciate the amazing work they do behind the scenes so we can do our job in the chamber and represent Territorians. So effectively, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what that means is I've moved an amendment to the previous amendments, so it will read the 3 government amendments proposed originally by the member for Brennan. So dot point 1, 2 and 3 from the member for Brennan, so the government's amendment, so I hope you're happy with that. But it also incorporates the original motion from the member for Mulka, dot points 1 and 2 for the member for Mulka. So essentially we've got the best of both worlds, we've got the best of the whole chamber all wrapped into one fantastic motion, which I think will have bipartisan support from the CLP government, from the Labor opposition, and from the crossbench, including the person who brought the motion before the House, the member for Mulka, who's brought us all together on this fine Wednesday evening. So, thank you, member for Catherine. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think everyone's had the right intention for this motion. I do thank the member for Mulka bringing on that important original motion, and I think based on the contributions by each of the CLP government members, I hope that you will find this quite satisfactory. So member for Brennan's dot point 1, 2 and 3 will then also include member for Mulka's original 2 dot points, which will then become 4 and 5. So that's the great world of democracy at play, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and the great work of the DLA staff who given them a bit of fun this afternoon and evening to try and get that very, very extra technical wording. So thank you very much for the advice and the support in being able to word that so it can splice together essentially all of the important things that have been captured by member for Mulka's motion and the amendment by the member for Brennan, which I know just had the technical amendment that was required brought before us by the member for Port Darwin's, which is why my amendment, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've learnt a lot tonight, why my amendment refers to the member for Port Darwin's amendment. So it's the 3 motions altogether, the original motion plus the 2 amendments captured. So, perfect. So for those listening and playing at home, the motion is now going to be amended to, which I will talk to Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this assembly, I've done the technical side, thank you to the DLA staff, that this Assembly, 1, acknowledges the harm caused by all forms of racism, whether based on race, ethnicity, culture or religion across the Northern Territory. 2, recognises the government's role in preventing discrimination and supporting the Territory's harmonious multicultural community. 3, calls on all Territorians to stand up and call out racism when it occurs. 4, affirms the NT's obligation to prevent racism and racial discrimination under the Positive Duty Law and calls for system-wide action aligned with the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. And 5, urges the co-design of the NT anti-discrimination strategy grounded in the National Anti-Racism Framework in full alignment with the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. So that's the amendment that I'm moving, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and speaking to the amended motion. I thank the yes, it does. I thank the member for Mulka for bringing us all together tonight and something that sounds like everyone can agree that racism absolutely has no place in the Northern Territory. I think that's very clear from everyone who's contributed to the debate tonight so far. And that all of the experiences have been very personal, and I acknowledge that. Some people have shared some very sensitive stories, whether it's personally from them, their own children, their parents, their constituents, their friends, their colleagues, and even in some cases strangers and things that people have seen and not actually known a person. So thank you. I know it's a difficult one. I understand some of the points the member for Blaine had made around racism feeling like it didn't exist in the Territory growing up, and I'm a few years younger than the member for Blaine, but we both grew up with that bachelor and rural kid upbringing, and you did feel like everyone was treated as just the kid next door or the kid down the street or the kid who lives in the block out near Finnis River. So it was always just that kind of much younger. Much younger. We won't bring age into this, member for Nelson, but in terms of that feel of the Territory, and I think that's what I've captured by listening to the debates tonight, that everyone wants to kind of feel that connection. We love the differences in the Territory. We want to celebrate the differences. We want to call out when people are not celebrating being Territorian and acting in a way of good faith and looking after each other. It doesn't matter what colour you are, black, white, brown, brindle, all colours of the rainbow, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We want to ensure that everyone in the Territory feels safe, that they they feel proud of who they are, that their cultural background is acknowledged but it's celebrated. But if there is a difference, then that's not a bad thing. And in terms of us as a jurisdiction here in the Northern Territory, we absolutely pride ourselves on the success of our multicultural community. I honestly, truly, and still believe from growing up and to this day, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the Territory is the most multicultural community in Australia. And I think it's important that debates like this brought on by the member for Mulka does also celebrate the success that we have in eradicating discrimination, but it also takes the important note that the member for Mulka has brought the spirit of the original motion in, and that is to ensure everyone in this place knows, and everyone outside of this place knows, that more work needs to be done to bring us together, to keep us together, and to make sure we move forward together. And I know that honourable members in this House, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are eager around sharing some of those great stories, particularly when it's around our electorates and how proud we are to be part of the communities that we represent, and share culture, language, story, art, music from all over the world, right here in the best jurisdiction of Australia, and that's the Northern Territory. From our Lunar New Year events, our Songkran Festival, India at Mindul, the Darwin Waterfront Harmony Soiree, the Italian Festival, Thailand Grand Festival, the Vietnamese Lantern Festival, and the Greek Lenti, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There are so many wonderful celebrations of the Territory's multicultural success each year that have become mainstays of yearly cultural calendar. Just as we should be proud of our multicultural history, we should also be proud of the fact that the history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across this country began over 60,000 years ago. And obviously there have been many turbulent times for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters in this country, but we should never take for granted, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we now live in a time that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture is celebrated, and it is an intrinsic part of the Territory's identity, and it should be celebrated. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Northern Territory has come a long way in confronting racism through open debate, through policy reform, through community-led change. But the work is not finished. And as leaders across the Territory, all of us in this place, we must continue to listen, learn and act when it comes to eradicating racism in the Northern Territory. Mr. Deputy Speaker, going to the amended motion and part of the original motion by the member for Mulka, it was a very proud day for the Northern Territory when the Aboriginal Justice Agreement was signed, and I am so honoured that I was a part of the government to bring that to the Northern Territory and to sign it off when the then Labor Chief Minister, Michael Gunner, signed it off. The opposition leader at the time, the member for Spillett, the now CLP Chief Minister, Leah Finocchiaro, and the then Shadow Attorney General for the CLP, the member for Barkly, Steve Eddington, and myself, the member for Arnhem, the former Labor Attorney General, we were able to sign off that in a bipartisan way. And there are, of course, many other signatories to this very important agreement in the Northern Territory. And it is still the case today, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If you believe in the Aboriginal Justice Agreement principles, you can sign up and become a signatory to the agreement and provide practical ways to ensure the principles of the agreement, the three main principles, will continue to be the guiding work of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'll take the opportunity. I know the member for Mulka spoke at length in his delivery of this motion to the House. But those aims are to reduce offending and imprisonment of Aboriginal Territorians, engage and support Aboriginal leadership, engage and support, and improve justice responses and services for Aboriginal Territorians. We all know the deplorable statistics about Aboriginal Territorians and incarceration rates with the criminal justice system here in the Territory, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Working with and supporting Aboriginal leaders is key to how we can change outcomes for Aboriginal Territorians when it comes to justice. And there is no greater need, Mr. Deputy Speaker, than here in the Northern Territory for us to work together to ensure that we can improve justice outcomes, not just for the social reasons, but also there is an economic story behind this too, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it really should be a concern to all of us that there are decisions that have been taken in this parliament recently over the last few months that go against the principles of the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. We have started this parliament by taking regressive steps of lowering the age of criminal responsibility, and despite all the evidence pointing to the fact that lowering the age will lead to more trauma, more pain and likely more reoffending, the CLP government still persisted with this change. Yes, we know that it was an election commitment, but ignoring the evidence and the expert advice does not make it any better that we were not going to see better outcomes from this legislative change. 9 months on, Mr Deputy Speaker, with crime getting worse across the Territory now, I think it might be worth trying to listen to those experts that were ignored. Mr Deputy Speaker, Aboriginal children already disproportionately represent the justice system. Lowering the age will exacerbate this issue and lead to more children becoming career criminals. Increasing the age of criminal responsibility will lead to less crime in the long term when real programs are done and implemented and expanded so that we can see that there is a commitment again to the Aboriginal Justice Agreement. And why I talk about this, and obviously it's part of the amended motion as well, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that we're starting to see more and more overt racism in the Northern Territory, which I never thought I would see at the levels. You know, I think most of us, well, I think everyone in the chamber has a Facebook page as a work page, probably a personal page too. But in every domain that I've seen, unfortunately, in open forum discussion, yes, I'm not anyone who wants to stifle free speech, but there becomes more and more overt racism that becomes the norm and is accepted in the general public, and I think that is a big issue for the Northern Territory moving forward together, Mr Deputy Speaker. So while there are decisions that are made in government that seem popular at the time, it doesn't necessarily, in my view, address the long-term needs past the election cycle, past the 4-year term of the government, Mr Deputy Speaker. And right now I think that, you know, absolutely agree that there needs to be more steps and more action when it comes to community safety, but with that also comes a silent trigger of racism, and it goes to some of the conversation and dialogue of the debate today where people sort of talk around or they'll talk about without actually pointing to the colour of someone's skin or the cultural background in the conversations that happen more publicly become more specific, and I think a lot of that is something that is not new to, unfortunately, what people will think about when it comes to a motion like this. Mr Deputy Speaker, the National Anti-Racism Framework is being developed, and it's around ensuring that Australia is a fairer country for all. We think about all the diversity and all the celebration that we love about not just the Territory but Australia as a country, and this work has been developed by the Australian Human Rights Commission, and the framework offers a roadmap to eliminate racism across the country. And in its recommendations, Mr Deputy Speaker, it tackles racism in our legal system, healthcare, education, workplaces, media and many other community spaces. The framework is built on excessive consultations with over 496 First Nations people from diverse backgrounds. Their voices highlighted the urgent need for systemic change. The framework prioritises First Nation leadership and knowledge, and it acknowledges the ongoing impacts of colonisation and seeks to empower First Nations people in the fight against racism. Mr Deputy Speaker, the benefits of the framework are not just First Nations people, but also culturally and linguistically diverse community, or called CALD. The Australian Human Rights Commission has developed resources like the Community Guide to support those affected by racism. This guide provides vital information on support services and reporting tools. Mr Deputy Speaker, while it will need to be the Australian government that takes the step for this national action to be implemented in this space, each state and territory government also has an important role to play in this space, and as both the major employers, but also as local leaders across each jurisdiction. And there is absolutely a lot to celebrate in the Northern Territory, but we should also note that there is concern in the rising level of anti-Semitic and Islamophobic behaviour, which we are seeing right around Australia, Mr Deputy Speaker. A strength of being Australian is living here, and that difference is celebrated and respected. And if you disagree with someone, you can do it respectfully. Almost about every issue, Mr Deputy Speaker. But unfortunately, we have recently seen across the country public demonstrations that are clearly racist and should be of concern to every single one of us. We saw this recently, unfortunately, Mr Deputy Speaker, when a neo-Nazi triggered a national debate on welcome to country during the federal election. Irrespective of your views on welcomes and acknowledgements of country, race relations and public debates on race relations should not be led with the views of neo-Nazis. Looking at some of the national and local results at the federal election, Peter Dutton and what was then known as the Coalition just a couple of days ago were punished by Aussies all over the country for attempting to lead a national debate on the back of some of the regressive behaviour. An overwhelming majority of Australians rightfully punished the Coalition for that, and now there have been further internal combustions with that, Mr Deputy Speaker. When it comes to anti-discrimination changes, within the context of this debate and motion before the House, it is worthwhile noting that the CLP government's plan, and they have talked about this publicly, we haven't seen anything yet to comment on technically, but their rollback of protections in the Anti-Discrimination Act. Huge concern, Mr Deputy Speaker. Our former Labor government's 2022 amendments to the Anti-Discrimination Act were the first significant overhaul in 3 decades. These reforms expanded the list of protected attributes, introduced it as civil offence for offensive behaviour, and as we understand it, Mr Deputy Speaker, the CLP intends to remove provisions.
Sorry, point of order.
Standing Order 43, I request an extension of time.
Leave granted? Aye, leave granted.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Member for Daly. As we understand, the CLP intends to remove provisions that make it unlawful to offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate someone based on personal characteristics such as race, gender or sexuality. Mr Deputy Speaker, these protections were designed to shield vulnerable communities from hate speech and vilification. This should be a huge concern to all of us across this chamber and the electorates and the people we represent in each of those electorates. Noting that we have seen recently around the country and of course recently in the Territory where there have been posters linked to neo-Nazi groups. We urge the CLP government to rethink their plans and reconsider any changes that will diminish the rights and protections of Territorians when it comes to discrimination. Mr Deputy Speaker, we do not want to see hate speech condoned in our community. Mr Deputy Speaker, Jeswin Yogotharan, the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, has labelled the proposed repeals as a significant setback for human rights and equality. And I think I heard some of the government members speak about equality, inequality, and what we can do to work together to ensure that we do have equality in the Territory. The anti-discrimination amendments that are proposed so far that we understand will roll back any chance to push equality in a fulsome, practical and respectful way in the Northern Territory forward. It'll only take us backwards. And the Commissioner warned the Northern Territory, and all of us in here, in fact, that removing these protections could open the door to dangerous levels of hate speech and discrimination, Mr Deputy Speaker. If there is a particular type of hate speech that the CLP thinks that they can promote or they want to promote, we urge them to be upfront and talk about it under parliamentary privilege. Don't go and change the Act so you allow people to do it and to do it in our community with no consequences. Mr Deputy Speaker, what is it that people can't say now that is going to be needing an act of legislation to be changed, to be relaxed, to be more open and flexible, to allow hate speech to creep into our everyday community? We do not believe that this is acceptable, Mr Deputy Speaker. If there is something that is needed to be said, that was prior to 2022 amendments, then why can't the CLP articulate that now? Would like to place it on the record if they so choose. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, we can be proud of the Territory's efforts to build a more inclusive society, but progress isn't permission to stop. Racism still exists. It's not telling anyone in here anything otherwise that they don't know. But our job in this place, Mr Deputy Speaker, as leaders across our communities and elected members of the Northern Territory Legislative Assembly, is to keep pushing for a future where every Territorian feels safe, that they feel heard, and that they feel respected about who they are. Change in the Territory has often come from the ground up, from our community voices refusing to be ignored. And as political leaders, Mr Deputy Speaker, it is our job to meet them where they are, not to retreat into complacency or cowardice. Mr Deputy Speaker, we have seen what's possible when governments listen to communities and when we invest in dignity, inclusion, truth-telling. Mr Deputy Speaker, that's the kind of leadership the Territory deserves, not one that rewinds progress or walks away when it matters the most to Territorians. Leadership means listening, even when it is uncomfortable. It also means standing up, not stepping back. And Mr Deputy Speaker, if we are serious about ending racism in the Northern Territory, then we need to act with the same courage and conviction our communities have shown us for decades, and to continue walking together and working together to stamp out racism in our communities. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. Are there any other speakers? Member for Catherine.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Never know whether to get it right. I just want to pick up on the member for Mulka's when he was speaking before about his incidents that, and I know even in opposition, the member for Mulka has spoken about incidents he's had at service stations, and it is quite sad, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we live in a world where someone like the member for Mulka and anyone in that fact can go to a service station and be refused to get fuel or whatever it is that they're after just because of the colour of their skin. It's totally inappropriate. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise today to speak on this amended motion, not the opposition's amended one, because I'd already done this before that. So, that we acknowledge the harm caused by all forms of racism, whether based on race, ethnicity, culture or religion, across the Northern Territory, that we recognise the government's role in preventing discrimination and in building and supporting a harmonious, multicultural community, that we call on all Territorians to stand up and call out racism wherever and whenever it occurs. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, let me start by saying racism has no place in our homes, our schools, our institutions or our hearts. And yet, despite all the progress we have made as a society, we know that it still persists. Sometimes hidden, sometimes overt, but always harmful. As the Minister for Education, I know that one of the most powerful tools we have to combat racism is education. Not just the education that happens inside classrooms, but the education that happens in relationships, in understanding and in empathy. And I want to take this opportunity to thank our teachers across the Northern Territory, whether they're working in our urban centres, on remote homelands or in our small rural towns. They are on the front line of the fight against racism every single day. They teach more than reading, writing and arithmetic. They teach kindness. They teach history of our past and resilience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. They teach respect for diversity, pride in culture and the strength that comes from walking together. I especially want to, just on that, Mr Deputy Speaker, I just want to digress and talk a little bit about, you know, I've spoken before in the Parliament here about the bilingual education schools, and I've spoken to the member for Mulka about the bilingual education schools as well. And whilst we have 9 schools across the Territory that do bilingual education, 4 of those schools, Mr Deputy Speaker, have
had bilingual education in their schools for 50 years. And I think that's a feat in itself, Mr Deputy Speaker. But as I've gone on to say, with that, you know, we have great schools and we have great teachers and great environments in schools, and we certainly want people to feel safe in our schools. But we are working really hard, Mr Deputy Speaker, on getting those school children to school, because in all of those schools where we have seen the bilingual education, the attendance rates just aren't really there. So some of them, you know, have only 30% attendance rates. So whilst education is a great way to stamp out racism and teach children right from wrong, we need to make sure that we get those children to school first and foremost. And I wanted to also just pick up, while I'm talking about other things, the overt racism that the Leader of the Opposition spoke about on social media. And I think that's a fairly relevant point, that as members of Parliament, we do put things out on social media, and you can't actually, without closing down all comments, you can't, you know, make sure that the people that are going to comment on your social media page are doing it respectfully and whatever. And, you know, in Katherine, we've just seen Do It for Dolly Day, and that is a cause that is very close to my heart, from friends Kate and Tick Everett that lost their daughter Dolly. That is a great initiative right across the territory, and whilst that teaches about anti-bullying and, you know, being kind to people, I think it goes the same way in talking about racism. And certainly people just need to be a little bit mindful. If you are going to let something out of your mouth or let your fingers do the walking on the text messages or on the social media, make sure that it is respectful and that it is not going to be hate speech or horrible to that person. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to acknowledge some of the schools in my electorate of Katherine. Katherine is a community that lives and breathes multiculturalism. It is a meeting point for people from many walks of life: First Nations families, long-standing Territorians, newly arrived migrants and seasonal workers, and those just passing through but who never forget the welcome they receive. And I think many times, Mr Deputy Speaker, again, I speak of the great things that happen in our community, and I think that's one of the strengths of living in Katherine, that we as a community are very welcoming of people. Everyone looks out for each other, and I think you know, even when we go through hard times, the community rallies together and really does come out and show their best. Also, we have an amazing, just speaking of migrant communities, you know, that was something with the multicultural facility as an election commitment, because whilst we have a huge multicultural members in Katherine, they don't actually have a particular place to gather. They have different functions at Goddenmarn, which is the cultural centre, but they don't have a space like up here in Darwin, where on Batten Road there's quite a lot of different cultures that have a particular place to go and hold their functions. And the multicultural community of Katherine, with the Red Cross community there, have fantastic events that they hold each year. They have the Joy of Many Colours. They have other events that bring the whole community together, with festivals of all different cultures, everyone brings their different food together and tastes all of the different cultures that we have in Katherine, and they are absolutely fantastic events that you know, I'm proud to say, as the member for Katherine, in that announcement in the election of that 1.5 million for a multicultural facility, and I look forward to seeing that come to fruition, Mr Deputy Speaker. We have migrants, families from Southeast Asia in Katherine, Africa and the Middle East, who speak of how the school community in Katherine was their first introduction to Australia. And we see that also, Mr Deputy Speaker, in our citizenship ceremonies. And each time we have a citizenship ceremony in Katherine, you know, it's great to see these people from many different cultures across the world come and choose Katherine as their home, and it's great to see them out and about bringing their culture to our community. And just recently, Mr Deputy Speaker, I went to the opening, and I've spoken about this before, of the walk-in talk-in space with the Charls 𝙏𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏𝘼𝙈𝙋𝙎 Women's Group. And that is a fantastic space that has taken up an empty shop in Woolworths. Now, that shop's been empty for many, many years. I want to say at least 10 years. But it's actually been a really good welcome space for the Charls 𝙏𝙎𝙎𝙏𝘼𝙈𝙋𝙎 Women Group. The funding was provided by the federal government with PHN. And those ladies, Mavis, Chio and Joanne, the elders there that have taken young children in. They've also got a residential facility, where they do take young children in and nurture them, love them, look after them like they're their own, and put them on a better path, Mr Deputy Speaker. So I look forward to also seeing the great work that the Charls walk-in talk-in space does in that Woolworths complex. I've spoken about the bilingual schools in education. We also, whilst I was out at Shepparton College celebrating the 50 years out there of bilingual education, there was a young girl working in the language centre, and it was great to see that she had been a student at that school, gone right through to year 12, and then gone back and worked in the language centre, done the full circle of education in her community. And they're the kind of opportunities, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we talk of on this side of the chamber, about having these opportunities in remote communities so that the children that go to school there, they're probably not as likely to leave that community like, potentially my child might go down south or something like that, but fortunately they have all come back and they are residing here in the Territory because we know it is a great place and it's a world of opportunities. But those children, the opportunities that they get to have in their communities, it was great to see that that young girl absolutely thriving in that language centre. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is how the Northern Territory can be at its best, a place where diversity isn't seen as a challenge to overcome, but something to nurture. We must be honest about the harm racism causes. It divides communities, it wounds our children, it limits people's potential and corrodes the fairness that every democracy depends on. Excuse me. Racism isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers in lowered expectations, in assumptions made in job interviews, in schoolyards, in the way some people are followed in shops or spoken over in meetings. But whether loud or quiet, all racism chips away at belonging, and it chips away at the future we want to build. Our government recognises that racism is not just a matter of personal behaviour, it's a systemic challenge, and that's why we are committed to addressing...
Sorry, point of order.
Thank you,
Member Dunn.
Mr Deputy Speaker. I move that the question be put.
Question is that the question be put. Those of the opinion say aye, the contrary no. Aye. I think the noes have it. Division. Division. Supported? Yes. Ring the bells.
Decision are 15 noes and 6 ayes. The noes have it. That is the end of general business.